All right, here we go. I'm going to start this show.
Hey, my name is King. If you don't know who I am, my name is Israel King. I'm a writer, director, and anime commentator on my main channel, King Tannic. Now, if you've been a fan of pop culture for any amount of time, then you surely must have noticed the sudden rise in popularity in anime and manga. Films breaking box office records, series topping the most pirated show of the year chart, and of course, the very apparent fan base that has surrounded it. According to a poll back in February of this year, about 50% of Gen Z watches anime. Now, if you're not Gen Z, it can be kind of hard not knowing anything about this new, sudden, very popular corner in the pop culture zeitgeist. And that's where we come in. King Tannic and the Network have partnered to bring you the best anime and manga related news show on YouTube. The Otaku Experience is your go-to place to find out the biggest stories of the week in the anime and manga industry. Still not convinced? Try the show out for yourself. The show airs Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or 5 p.m. Eastern. The Otaku Experience, only on the Network.
Robservations with Robert Met.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the as-yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am, of course, Robcasting it. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Independence Day. We will not go quietly into the night. It is no longer an American holiday. It is a world holiday. Today we celebrate our Independence Day and we celebrate Bill Pullman. So happy Independence Day, everyone. This is Robservations episode 867. Now, you know, I wasn't going to do a show today, to be honest. And I was talking to my good buddy, Mr. Michael Davis, who I've known, I think, for 30 years this year. 3 decades of friendship. I first met him when he worked at Full Moon Studios, making a movie called Beanstalk. It was for kids, and it was quite good. And he went on, he basically discovered Carrie Russell and made a film with her called 8 Days a Week. That is a delightful film. He also made a movie called Monster Man that was recently released. You saw it on Let's Get Physical Media, a brand new media book in Germany, so his work resonates. He made 100 Girls, 100 Women, but the movie you probably most know him for is, of course, the great action gun extravaganza Shoot 'em Up, starring Tim Burton's girlfriend, Monica Bellucci. Can you believe that guy? He goes from Helena Bonham Carter to Monica Bellucci. But Michael Davis made Monica Bellucci the milkmaiden in his movie Shoot 'em Up. You got to see Shoot 'em Up. If you haven't seen Shoot 'em Up with Clive Owen, well, the question is, why haven't you? And allow me to introduce you to my crazy friend, writer, director, entrepreneur, animator, artist, kind soul, great father, Michael Davis. Mr. Michael Davis,
wow,
welcome. Did you like that?
I loved it. But, you know, I have to tell you, having known you for so long, and I want all of your fans out there to know this.
Uh-oh.
Did you know how Dulcet has that thing, the most interesting man in the world? Well, they got it wrong because you are the most interesting man in the world.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Every time we get together, I could just like, oh my God, this guy's just so entertaining and so charming. It's just a pleasure to be with you all the time.
I'm going to PayPal you how much? How much are you for that?
It's true. It's true.
No, well, seriously, it's great to have you on the show, but what was really interesting, like you and I were talking about something totally unrelated, and then you made a comment about, we were talking about the multiverse and how we've got Across the Spiderverse, we have Flash, we had Multiverse of Madness, you have the Kang Dynasty coming. Everybody has been leaning into sort of multiversal stories all at once. Multiple, Star Trek did a whole season in the Mirror Universe. We're constantly seeing multiverse stories. And you said something really interesting. You said inherently they kind of don't work.
Well, you know, I think they can work, but it also came from one of your previous shows, like a a week ago where you talking about, is there superhero fatigue? And I was talking about, I'm just fatigued by them trying to outdo their spectacle, special effects, battles at the end. I just get fatigued by seeing all this schmear on the screen that doesn't have to do with what you're talking about, character and good story points. They just keep trying to outdo themselves with the big stuff on the screen. And since all these superhero movies and even James Bond and Mission Impossible, it's always these end of the world scenarios. But they've done so many end of the world scenarios that I feel like the genre filmmakers are now deciding we can't just destroy one world, let's destroy a multiple of worlds, because they think that's going to top losing our world. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, I'm invested in my world, where I see all the characters that I love, that I have affection for on screen, and it's hard to give enough screen time to even those characters to get you to feel about them. But when you do a multiverse, why should I care about these alternate universes where the people I love and care about don't exist? And then to make it work, and you gave some good examples of a past comic book story that works, you have to spend time investing in the other characters in those other universes for you to care about them being destroyed. So I just think it's them trying to layer on topping and topping and topping themselves, and it just gets tiresome.
Well, you know, it was funny because when you were talking about that, the thing that struck me, obviously sort of the birth of the modern, there's a couple of things going on. There's a lot of alternate history stories, which I consider multiverse stories, where, you know, the Axis powers won World War II, obviously. Then you get A Man in the High Castle, where America is split up by Japan and Germany. But I was thinking about, like, how the DC universe, with the story back in the early 60s, A Flash of Two Worlds, where you had, because a lot of those characters came out of World War II, and then you had the modern Justice League, and they had to sort of reconcile the time difference between, so you had they created Earth 1 and Earth 2. And that was sort of the birth of the DC multiverse. And you had the Barry Allen Flash use the cosmic treadmill, and he was able to meet the Jay Garrick Flash that preceded him. And suddenly the DC universe had a multiverse. And then they created an Earth 3 where the only superhero was Alexander Luthor. And like they had the crime syndicate, and instead of Superman, there was Ultraman, and instead of Green Lantern, there was Power Ring, and all the superheroes were actually supervillains on Earth 3. And then they added, when they got the Fawcett characters and Captain Marvel and the Marvel family, then there was like Earth S, and the Charlton characters were on another Earth. But what I thought was really interesting, you pointed out that how, like, they so casually and flippantly utilize these other multiverses. When people die in those multiverses, you don't feel it. There's no emotional connection. Isn't that what your point was?
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's also hard because screen time is real estate. But, you know, when you start talking about, like, you know, if the Nazis won, you know, World War II, you're still basically dealing with one timeline, but then it changes. Or if you're dealing Back to the Future, you're still dealing with one reality that could get messed up. And
right.
So you're not, like, overwhelming them with all these parallel worlds. And,
yes.
And so you're still dealing with, how does Biff change? You know, how does Marty McFly change? So you care about it. In some ways, it's really interesting because it's a real what if. You're still dealing with one sort of a set of characters and circumstances. So I do have to say, I want to point out there, I'm always amazed at your level of knowledge about comic books and genre. And I feel very stunted because my mom wouldn't let me read DC and Marvel when I was growing up. The only superhero I could read was Super Goof, the Gold Key, you know, Disney comics.
Because my God.
Mom, they're too violent, right? And then my mom, when I discovered the James Bond novels, she said I could only read them if my dad went through them and snipped out the sex parts.
No.
Right? And then I started reading them, and the sex parts in James Bond books are literally 2 sentences. And then they go to a new chapter. And my mom says, well, I want you to know that kind of sex stuff doesn't happen in the real life. And I said, well, Mom, maybe not in your life. But anyway, so
Too much information, Mom.
And it's great that you give context to all these references, but I want to tell you that I bow to your superior knowledge. I am just like, and that's why I'm obsessed with James Bond, because it's the only thing my parents would let me read. And then I read Matt Helm, which was kind of boring. And but I did read the Nick Carter novels, which were very full of sex. But go on.
Well, no, like like I was gonna say, what I thought was really interesting. I think and I think it's still the greatest comic book crossover, company-wide crossover of all time, which is the mid-'80s DC Crisis on Infinite Earths. You had Marvel's Secret Wars, which it didn't hold a candle. And in Secret Wars, all the villains and the heroes were brought to a place by the Beyonder to fight. But in Crisis, literally the universes were being destroyed. And to go to your point, one of the things I thought that when I was a kid growing up, one of the coolest things in comics was Earth 3 in DC, where you had the evil superheroes. Like, I love the evil superheroes. And the first time I met them was in Justice League 110, which was a giant-size 100-page comic, and they reprinted the original Crisis on, I want to say, what was it called? It was Crisis on something else. It was not Infinite Earths, but Crisis on, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on this. I've read this comic a million times. But so you met the crime syndicate from Earth 3. So when they started Crisis on Infinite Earths, the comic opened with Earth 3. And you met Alexander Luthor, who is the one hero on this planet, and you met the crime syndicate. And here's a panel from that opening of Crisis. And I always loved this because, first of all, the great George Perez, you can see what a legend he was in terms of his panel design. And here's a great, let me zoom in here. It's so great. It's everywhere, Power Ring. I used to revel in my powers, but when I need them most, they're useless. It's ironic, isn't it? We spent a lifetime terrorizing this world, yet our last moments alive are spent trying to save it. And so these characters, I thought it was a really ballsy move to take these characters that I'd been reading, for years and open up Crisis on Infinite Earths with the end of Earth 3. And these were well-established characters that had been crossing over with the Justice League for decades, since the 60s. And they decided to open this comic. So immediately, as a longtime DC comic reader, I was like, no fucking way. They're destroying Earth 3? And it was something that had been well-established. So immediately, as a comic reader, you were invested. Whereas when we watch Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, you look at characters like, we know who Black Bolt is, we know who Professor Xavier is, we know who the Captain Marvel is, and we haven't seen Reed Richards in the MCU, but they introduce these characters that we know, and within 20 minutes of meeting them, Wanda Maximoff from our universe comes in and kills them all. Which, it's like, well, hey, we barely knew you. So,
Yeah,
and you're on Universe 800, so there's no emotional stakes for the audience. I mean, it's funny to watch Reed Richards turn into a bunch of spaghetti, but we've never met him before, so it doesn't resonate. It doesn't resonate the way Tony Stark fighting Obadiah Stane resonated in Iron Man 1, right?
Yeah, well, one thing I did like about, I didn't follow those because I couldn't read all those comics, but I kind of know the concept. I really love the idea of these DC and Marvel launching these concepts that are going to go through all their characters. I love that idea. It's so creative, so imaginative, with such a new idea. But they probably worked better in the comics because you had time. If you started, maybe the example you gave where they're dead too early, but hopefully throughout all the comic books, and you read, I got this one, you had time to get to know and care about the situation. And in those situations, you at least had the comparison of, here is Lex Luthor, he's a good guy, right? What would he be like as a good guy? And it's much more interesting to know the other Lex Luthor because you knew the other version. So I don't know. I mean, I love the concept, but it's harder in a movie where you're trying to compress all of this stuff. I just saw the new Spider-Man movie, and I love the artistry in it, But I wanted to see all these different Spider-Mans, not just a little, a few of them. I wanted to do a movie on each one of them. And
Right.
that's why I didn't care and I actually found it confusing. And once you're confused, you don't care.
Right. Well, and I think that's definitely a problem. By the way, Philo Beddo sends in a super chat and says, "Greetings from the UK, RMB. Always a pleasure to listen to your dulcet tones with your extensive film knowledge. And oh, it's my birthday too. Say hello." Well, hello, Philo. Happy birthday to you. Thanks for tuning in from the United Kingdom. And it's good to have you here, sir. And I like the name Philo Beddo. So there you go. But Michael,
the character, there's Philo Farnsworth who invented the TV. But wasn't the Phantom Tollbooth kid named Philo? I can't remember. Philo is a cool name.
Philo is a cool name. But no, I look, I think you're right. I mean, here's what I find strange. And I'll ask you this question. Why do you think that we have all of these movies, both 2 studios and Warner Brothers and Disney, Marvel, or 3 studios really, and why is everybody leaning into the multiverse now? We've got TV shows leaning into the multiverse. We've got movies leaning into the multiverse. Do you think it's a cultural thing? Is there a zeitgeist thing? Is it because we want to live in a different universe than the one we're living in now? Why all of a sudden has the multiverse become so ubiquitous across many different platforms?
Well, it's interesting, and I think people maybe underestimate audiences, but like when I was at film school, they talked about audiences seeing the first films, and they didn't have any cuts in the films. They didn't even have any close-ups. They were like filmed stage plays of one shot because they thought audiences would be jarred by having a cut. Right. And then they were like, audiences don't want to hear people talking. They just want to, see what they're used to. Right. But there is a level of preparation that people start accepting things and things start happening in the zeitgeist. And I think now because, the early science fiction probably laid the groundwork for alternative histories and all that. And it becomes sort of people get used to it. And then the zeitgeist kind of catches up, and the zeitgeist now is, okay, let's have multiverses. And I think maybe this whole thing with the VR, with the Apple goggles and the Meta with Facebook and all that, and, augmented reality, then it also feeds into this zeitgeist of now of other realities. And certainly, playing video games for, 20 years since they've been the biggest business ever in entertainment is that you go to another reality and you feel like you're living in that world. And then when you got the headsets and you can talk to somebody while you're playing, Call of Duty or whatever, that's on a heightened level of living in that reality. And all those things feed into a zeitgeist that then people understand that you can have 2 different realities going on. You look at something like The Matrix, it gives you this idea that maybe there's 2 things going on, a digital reality and what's real, I guess that was in Lawnmower Man. So all these little stepping stones makes it easier for people to accept. And if you figure that's the same version of old-time movie audiences not being able to have cuts and all filmmakers thinking they'll be jarred by it, if you did these multiverses in the 60s, maybe the audiences would be jarred, and now they're not going to be. And the studios are so afraid of making something that they're always behind the times. They're always underestimating audiences. So they only do things when it's safe. And so I think now it's safe to go into the multiverse.
Well, it's interesting too to me because there's levels of success with this multiversal storytelling. Obviously, Across the Spiderverse has doubled. It's going to end up probably doubling the worldwide gross of the first Spiderverse. But that already prepped you for. I mean, I think that the Spiderverse films.
I do think it's one of the. I agree with you, but I'm not until I see the second half of it. I don't know how successful of a story it is. I think that they're benefiting that the first movie was so awesome, and you never want to have style be better than substance. But the style was so fantastic, and the style in the new movie is even better. It's the most gorgeous, almost artistic achievement I've ever seen, at least filmically, that I think it benefits that the style elevates it, right? And you just want to go see it again and again and again because, oh my God, wow, I got to see this thing. And I'm not, and maybe I'm old. Like, I took my mom to see Star Wars and she said it was visual overload. And now I'm old, and sometimes maybe everybody that I'm saying about all the big special effects and all that, maybe I'm old and I'm like my mom, it's too much of an overload, but the younger audiences need all that. It could be also an age thing that's happening when I say too much.
But I would say that in the first Spider-Verse film, they gave us a group of spider people like Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Ham and all from different universes, but we cared about them. Like what your assertion that you have to care. So our way of caring about a whole universe is through one character. Mm-hmm. And I think that the first Into the Spider-Verse really made you care about the relationship between Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales, and that's carried over to this. And so you already had the groundwork, the character groundwork that was done. Even the Peter Parker and Miles Morales relationship is great, and I think that's like you were saying, that's the key. You can make an audience, and I always bang on, as you know, on this channel about characters and story. And once you establish a credible relationship between characters, even if they're characters from different universes, if they have a legitimate relationship, friendship, mutual respect, if you like them as characters, you've done that groundwork to make you care about a multiverse through one person.
I was thinking about after we got off the phone, and I was thinking about, again, the superhero fatigue. And the thing about it is that usually the first movie is the best because the character has the biggest problem. They have what is called the character's ghost. I'm a big fan of this John Truby, and he talks about what is the thing that is haunting the character. And also the character at the beginning of the story, he has a set of values or a set of beliefs that are ultimately proved wrong. And when his set of beliefs are proven wrong and he's forced to change, right, that kind of illustrates the theme. And I do like this whole Truby thing where he says, what is theme? And I hate it when they go, oh, the theme is about love. Theme is about changing, right?
Right.
He actually makes it more specific. He says the theme should be a demonstration of how to live in this world, that how to be a better person, how to make the world better. And that's usually, unless you're dealing with a tragedy, in which a tragedy is where the character refuses to change, even though he has information in front of him and is forced to change but doesn't. That's how you illustrate it. You look at all the great stories. I mean, even you were talking about The Verdict the other day, and Paul Newman is making a ton of terrible decisions that are going to hurt his client. And Truby also says, in some way or another, that character is hurting other people with the way he behaves. And at the end, the way we learn to live in this world is not to hurt other people. And so the problem with superhero fatigue is that the first story is usually the best because you have the biggest problem with the character, the biggest haunting, and they undergo the greatest character change. And I know it's scary and the studios will never do this, but it's almost better if they, instead of launching, Iron Man 5, 6, 7, or 8, they launch more characters, because they have the better stories, the better first stories.
That's interesting. That's it. Now, to me, what I find, I see multiverse stories kind of as adjacent to time travel stories in a way. Like you pointed out earlier, that a time travel story is usually just about our timeline and one divergent path that would change our timeline. It's not really a multiverse, which I agree with you. But I remember, though, as a little kid, one of my favorite, and it still is, one of my favorite classic Star Trek episodes was Mirror, Mirror. And it was something that began a trope that's been all through Star Trek, which is they go into the evil universe. And I kind of see these alternate stories where the Axis powers took over the world is kind of the same thing. It's not necessarily a multiverse. It's more like a road less traveled universe it is a multiverse, but it's not part of like 1,000 different multiverses, although they've done that in Star Trek as well. But
that again feeds into the preparation for today. That episode has been seen by millions of people, and that helps pave the way for people to understand the mechanics. And so that's one of the stepping stones. And
then you've had shows like Sliders, which was a show that was literally sliding from universe to universe to universe. and people had to be accustomed to that. But one of the things that I always loved about like mirror universe stories is it allows our heroes to play their evil counterparts, and you get to see like Leonard Nimoy basically playing a bearded space pirate and relishing it, and you know you're really digging. You get to see Kirk. I mean Shatner unleashed. You know, in Mirror, you want credits, Spock? I'll give them to you. You know what do you want, Spock? I mean, it's so great when you get to see actors get to.
Yeah, but you know what they should have done is, of course, you couldn't do that with Shatner. Is having a modest Shatner, like a high, unassuming, giving credit to others rather than the egotistical one. He's never going to play a complete opposite of himself.
Well, wait a minute. He did in the first season episode "Enemy Within" when he was split into two. There was the not meek, but the quiet.
Okay. Well, there you go.
And he did a great job because Shatner's a great actor. Don't you tell anybody any different. Come on now.
Well, I do have to say, and I want to point out, because, you know, I am not the biggest Star Trek fan, but I admire your passion for it. And I think that your William Shatner is my Sean Connery. That it just, you know, you were so young, and that was the ideal male figure you wanted to become. And mine was Sean Connery. And so, you know, and anybody else that comes along, I'm going to compare. You compare all the Star Treks to the William Shatner ones. I compare all the Bonds to Sean Connery. And if I have a flawed view of some of the Bonds, it's only because it's like imprinting, you know, like the duck, you know, sees the mama duck and imprint. That's your mom, right? Well, I imprinted. That's my Bond. Well, you imprinted on the William Shatner. And there is an element, I agree with a lot of your logic, but there is an element of imprinting when you're young that influences how passionate you are about your beliefs about James Bond or Star Trek.
Yeah. Now, I just want to say that Sean Hoover has sent in both a tip and a super chat, and he's asking about Sean Hoover says that he sent me a letter talking about Indiana Jones and fans, which I have, but I haven't downloaded that one yet. So I'll save that for tomorrow's episode, because there's going to be there's people have sent me a ton of Indiana Jones letters, and I want to read this because I want to talk to you about Indiana Jones too. And Sean goes on to say, the dawn of multiple truths is a recent political trend, the big lie, etc. So a multiverse or multi-truths really fits this mentality, unfortunately. Ooh, I really like that.
I do like that, but I would point out in our society is that you're giving more credence to multiple truths, which are all fake truths, and we most of the time know what the real truth is, but people believe that there are other truths that there are truths that are actually lies, but people give it the credence of the absolute truth. So right. I wouldn't say that we're in a society of multiple truths. We're in a world of where people believe in multiple ideas, but really there still is only one truth out there. And it goes back to what I don't know whether you want to get into this, but you know, you were talking about
why not
need a critical thinking, right? And I think the problem with critical thinking is we're always trying to find a band-aid to it. Like, why don't people today have better critical thinking? And I go back to, I think it's in Sweden or Finland or Norway. I'm going to get it wrong, but I know I got the ideas right. Is they start sex education with kids in kindergarten, and they get sex education through elementary school, junior high, and high school. They have the lowest AIDS rate. They have the lowest abortion rates. They have the lowest venereal disease rate. They have the lowest rate of unwed mothers because they're educating people at a young age. And they, you know, when kids acquire language from the moment they're born to age 3 or whatever, their mind is at such a sponge that this is where you get the fastest and best education. And I think all this stuff about critical thinking should be taught, you know, when you're young. So then when you get to be 20 or whatever, you already are great at critical thinking, and we're not fooled by these fake truths or these lies, because we are gotten to be awesome at critical thinking. And, you know, all this stuff is, you know, if we just educated kids with this stuff when we're younger and not being afraid of ruining their childhood by giving them the dangers of real life. Because if this stuff, like this whole sex education, you can apply it to any subject, right? And we could teach them about political discourse, about how to listen to all different ideas. I mean, and, you know, I think this whole black and white, you know, red versus blue is so wrong. It'd be better if there were no political parties. I know you don't like getting into politics.
No, but it's
all
look,
about, let's pick the best ideas, or take this part of this idea and get the best ideas rather than having it a choice of A or B.
Look, I agree, and I have to point out that you are a father of 3, and your children are growing up to be quite impressive in terms of their own accomplishments artistically and academically. And you've been able to. Let me ask you this: so nowadays we're arguing about whether people are screaming that kids are drag shows or whatever, and I agree with you. I mean, I think that when you say talking about sex education, it's not like you tailor it to the age level.
Right. There is a conservative thought that, oh, you're going to sexualize the kids early. Well, the fact of the matter is you're not, because their hormones haven't kicked in. So even if they're educated, they're not going to be sexualized, because it's a biological process. As you get older, your genes unleash or develop these hormones that make you sexually active. But you're not going to become sexually active in kindergarten, because you just don't have the components.
Well, you wouldn't want to, I think like any education, you have to take it gradually. It's like mathematics. You can't jump in and teach people trigonometry before they've learned to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. You have to. But look, I agree with you, and I think that one of the things I love about genre literature, science fiction, fantasy, horror, whether it's novels, whether it's movies, whether it's comics, is one of the things about, and I know for me, when I joined the science fiction book club when I was 9 years old, reading those books, it was like mind blowing, and reading Frank Herbert's Dune at like 10 and 11, 12 years old, there were so many different concepts, everything from ecosystems to governments to politics. I mean, there was so much stuff, and yet it's a science fiction novel. And genre literature always, it was poo-pooed when I was growing up as being lesser than somehow. And yet there were so many concepts and so many things that I was introduced to as a kid. I mean, even like something like Lord of the Rings. I remember reading Lord of the Rings. I was reading it in elementary school, and you understand, okay, there's different political factions. I mean, Gondor and Rohan have beef, and you're learning so much within the context of being entertained. And I think that, in a way, certainly when it comes to Star Trek, I'm disappointed in how dumbed down Star Trek itself has become. And yet you watch House of the Dragon, for instance. House of the Dragon, to me, is a pretty sophisticated show that deals with a lot of different, even more so in a way than Game of Thrones was, in terms of just dealing with human nature.
And I think I agree with you about, it's just too bad that science fiction is poo-pooed, because it's actually better than the literary fiction most of the time, because they're actually proposing ideas that can be debated. And I think the problem with what's happened with Star Trek is it's harder to do good science fiction, and most Star Trek has become science fantasy, because that's what Star Wars is, and it's just eye candy. It's a vehicle for eye candy, and that's part of it is it's a higher bar to achieve, because when science fiction strives for something but it doesn't work, it can be kind of dull. But if you're doing an eye candy movie, it's easier to achieve the eye candy effect. It's harder to fail when you're just doing eye candy and the audience expectation is just eye candy. So part of it is, I don't want to say laziness, but again, if you're talking about dollars, right, everybody's going to go for the easiest thing. And, it's easier to hire an army of effects guys than find a good idea.
Right. Shin Gogi sends in a $20 tip. Thank you for that, Shin. Hi, to me, the problem with multiverses, especially as used in the movies, is they remove consequences from decisions. If someone dies or other such big consequence happens, just go to another universe and get new ones. Yuck, Shin says. What do you think about that?
I totally agree with it. And it also, but the thing is they invested the time. It's sort of like It's a Wonderful Life. What if Jimmy Stewart hadn't been there, and then all these people had even worse lives? If somebody dies, you need to go and see the consequence, not just the immediate consequence, but what happened 20 years later because that character wasn't there anymore. And that takes up real estate. And that's why probably these multiverses might work better in literature, that you have more time and less pressure of the box office, or in maybe TV series or comic books where it can be fully explored. But he's basically pointing out that they avoid the consequences or seeing the duality. If the guy hadn't died, this would have been happened, or because he died, this happens. And that all takes setups and payoffs, which is real estate that movies sometimes don't have.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I immediately, like, I was thinking about 11/22/63, the Stephen King novel about a guy goes back in time.
Don't get me started on that. Okay.
Okay. Wait. And then there was a Twilight Zone episode in the mid '80s called Profile in Silver about the Kennedy assassination, and because I think a lot of authors grew up with a fascination about the Kennedy assassination and what would have happened to America if you'd prevented John F. Kennedy from dying. What would have happened with Vietnam, what would have happened with civil rights, a lot of things. But since I know it's something where I was going to get.
This is, the fact of the matter is, and if you want to lead into my whole Nixed animated movie
it's funny because I wasn't thinking that at first.
I know,
was just...
now it does. But first off, I want to say that I still hate it in pop culture where they go, and conspiracy theorists, with the, who killed Kennedy, and they still perpetuate this idea that Lee Harvey Oswald was the single, gunman, and that is absolutely, absolutely wrong. But even in pop culture, they perpetuate it. And I was reading, because I watched the.
Wait a minute. So you're a conspiracy theorist?
No, they actually say is that they use conspiracy theorists to demean people. And when I was researching my Nixed project...
Well, wait. It sounded like you said Lee Harvey Oswald was not the shooter.
No, he's not. Or worst case scenario, he was not a guy acting alone. There's absolutely... That is the craziest, stupidest thing. I'll tell you the number.
So you're a conspiracy theorist. Then you believe that...
What they say is that I am a conspiracy realist. Because it's sort of, how they quote or knee-jerk liberal to demean people. The word conspiracy theorist is a way to demean and put people down. But we should probably do it on another time. But so everybody knows, I got paid and I love doing this. I wrote, directed, and animated all by myself a feature-length film about Richard Nixon solving the Kennedy assassination, which is an alternative history.
Okay, well, wait a minute. Wait. Let me.
I researched all this stuff out the wazoo.
So wait, now you made Shoot 'Em Up. It came out from New Line, and then you. I want to get this straight. You spent years and years. You did the entire movie yourself. You hand animated a feature film all by yourself. You wrote it, you directed it, and you were able to do that because you have a background in art. And if people know Shoot 'Em Up, you had made animatics to sell the film to New Line.
That's right.
So,
well, I should say, I don't want to say since Shoot 'Em Up, I filled my whole time doing Nixed. Basically, Shoot 'Em Up did not, perform well.
They didn't sell it properly.
Well, yeah, but again, that's another conversation. But it didn't perform, and the thing about it is because I didn't have another studio movie to say, well, let's hire Michael. He did this hit, and that. So what if Shoot 'Em Up didn't perform? Let's give him another shot. I ended up pitching to direct this the sequel to the movie Red, And the executive I pitched to said, it called my agent and says, well, that's about the best, director pitch I've ever seen. And actually, I have to tell you, it was one of my medium pitches, but it was not my best pitch. But great, he thought that. But he also then told me, and he told my agent, but I can't go to my boss because he's going to look at Shoot 'em Up. Well, it didn't perform. We're not hiring him. But Shoot 'em Up was awesome. You should see it. He'd be great. He'd be great for Red. He said, I can't get my boss to spend 90 minutes looking at Michael's film. So the people that are making decisions, we were talking about, you're talking about in your superhero fatigue, let's just get the guy that fits. They're not willing to spend 90 minutes to consider a great candidate. They just want to. I can't believe I was on, God, I can't remember. I was working with the guys that, what's that other comic book company that does Archer and all that?
Valiant.
Valiant. And I was working with the guys from Valiant, but it was worse, and Fox, that they wanted to boot up one of their characters. And they were making a writer's list of who would be great for this project. And we created the writer's list in 10 minutes. And I was like, but you're talking about maybe making $100 million in your initial decision, which the script is the most important thing, and you're only going to spend 10 minutes on who should write it and make their master list from there? That's how crazy the decision-making process is.
No, well, and I have to say, you didn't just pitch Red. You wrote, you had a script that I love that you wrote called Bulletproof Crush that I always thought should get made. You also did the best presentation that I've ever seen for anything ever, which was for your show Pulp.
Right.
Right. Which in a way was, the show that was Banshee, that show Banshee.
Yeah, I know.
Pulp was better. I mean, you did this presentation where
you came the night to help me when I made those gigantic boards and I was spray mounting them. You came in the middle of the night. I had the big boards. It was a Hollywood Boulevard, and you helped me because it was like this. I brought in like a 30 foot by 8 foot presentation of panels of each episode, but. We don't need to go into. All I'm saying is, I wanted to say I spent the 5 years after Shoot 'em Up using the window of notoriety, trying to get my next gig.
Yeah.
And I got some writing assignments. I got a pilot assignment, but I couldn't get the next directing gig. And maybe if I wasn't so picky, but I also couldn't find many scripts that I wanted to go balls out on and pitch. So maybe it's partially my pickiness so I spent 5 years after that, and then my friend was going to do a bunch of documentaries, and then he sent me to another guy, and then I met a guy back in my hometown DC who liked things in the political arena and had this idea, and that became Nixed, and he financed it. My friend back here.
Nixed had its premiere last year at one of the most prestigious animated. You were invited to come to, and forgive me, it's in France. What is the name? The Annecy Animation Festival. So,
and it is the biggest, and it's the premier animated festival in the world. And we had a premiere there, and I was amazed. The European audiences know more about American history than Americans do. But I want to circle back to why I reacted to the Stephen King thing.
Oh, okay.
He said that he believed Lee Harvey Oswald was the single gunman, although his wife said she didn't believe it. And I think Stephen King is being insincere because when you see the story from a writer's standpoint, to make a good, strong, great story, which is his main concern, it's easier to keep ideas. Keep it simple, everybody, so you can understand. Keep it simple. And the most simple idea was Lee Harvey Oswald was working alone. And so when he said Lee Harvey Oswald, he believed was the only person involved, he did it because it was good for his writing and it was good for the book. It was easier to write a great story that way. But in real life, if he wasn't a novelist, he wouldn't be saying that. He'd be saying all this other research, right? Like, I'll just give you one example. I know I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist.
It's great. It's great.
A conspiracy realist. Okay. So after the assassination, right, Lee Harvey Oswald knows that he's been set up. And he goes out and he needs to get home because that's where he left his gun. He had a revolver. Well, if he had planned to kill Kennedy and he knew he'd be on the lam, why didn't he bring the gun to work that day so he'd have it with him? So when he left the book depository building and fled, he'd have everything that he needed with him and he could just flee out of town rather than going back home where everybody knew where he lived, right? Doesn't make sense, right? The other thing that's crazy, which I put in my movie, which is really great, when Lee Harvey Oswald left the book depository and he knew he was in trouble and needed to get home, he was flagging down a cab. And there was this old lady that was also flagging down the same cab. Here, his life is in danger. He lets the old lady take the cab and he waits for the next one because he's a nice guy. Even though he's going to be killed or shot by the cops, he gives up the cab. And there are documentations of the cab driver telling the story about seeing Oswald. And the other thing that's really kind of crazy is that you can even see this on YouTube. You know, they want Lee Harvey Oswald owned a man-liquored Corcano, which they said shot Kennedy. And that was the gun that Lee Harvey Oswald owned. Well, the first gun that the cops found up there on the 6th floor where the shot came from was a German rifle. It was a Mauser. And even Walter Cronkite, the most venerable newscaster in the history of newscasting, went on the air and said the gun was a Mauser because he had gotten the information from the police that it was a Mauser. And then all of a sudden, because that was not the gun that the people that set up Oswald wanted it, they ended up going, the police chief, right, who was friends with the mayor, who was the brother of the former second in command at the CIA, made him say, no, this is the gun. They totally swapped it out, right? And in every police interview, even back then, they recorded it or they gave notes. There were no notes and no recordings of the first interviews with Oswald, right? And here's the other thing, you can go onto YouTube. They found the third rifle on the rooftop of the building, and you can go on the YouTube and see the documentary of them finding the third rifle. So There's so many things that says this was not Lee Harvey Oswald working alone, if indeed he did take the shot. I don't believe he took the shot, but
okay,
you'll have to watch next. It's pretty amazing.
This stream just got way more interesting than we were going to talk.
Why don't you show the trailer and then they'll understand what we're
Well, hang on a second, but before I'm going to show I'll show the trailer now. So set this up. Set up the trailer. What is this trailer? What we're going to see it for your movie. It's called Nixed.
Right. And I ended up actually animating 3 hours worth of a show, but I ended up cutting it down to make it a feature length. It's 2 hours long. And it's basically the story of Richard Nixon solving the JFK assassination. And there were assassination attempts on Nixon when he was in office. And my character believes that the same people that killed Kennedy want to kill Nixon because, JFK, made peace with, Nikita Khrushchev. And Nixon made peace with Brezhnev. They both had these similar policies, right? And that were against sort of the extreme right wing that wanted Kennedy out of there. And Nixon thinks that they want to kill him because he's doing the same things they hate. And so the only way to protect himself is if he solves the greatest mystery of the 20th century of who is really behind the killing of JFK. And in fact, Nixon and Kennedy were sort of friends. When Nixon was vice president, his office was in the Capitol building, and just across the hall was JFK's office. And they weren't necessarily pals. Nixon thought they were pals. JFK thought Nixon was a loser, but Nixon thought they were friends. And so the story is basically kind of gives you the backstory of JFK and Nixon, and then Nixon kind of, all these kind of ideas I told you about why Oswald isn't the guy. And I actually have to tell you, all right, I actually think that my solution, which you can never prove at this point, but I actually think it's the best posited solution to what really happened of anything that's out there.
Wow,
and
okay.
I can't really tell you that because it'll hurt your viewing of the movie, but And I have to say, the last thing I want to say is when people see this movie, 95% of what's in this movie is true. The only part that is not true is Nixon acting like a full-on Sam Spade detective. But all the facts that he actually finds, now you might say, well, that's not true. All I can say is that whatever I put in there has been documented in multiple sources as being true. Now, whether they end up being not true, okay. But I found I wouldn't put it in there unless I could find many places where people said all this stuff. And I had to leave stuff out that that there was just not room. But 95% of it, the only thing that's not true is Nixon being a detective. But he was so interested in the Kennedy assassination that he had them bring the car, the limo, to the White House because he wanted to check it out because he was kind of investigating it. They put it in some warehouse in Michigan, you know. I mean, the crazy thing is that everybody now knows that there are crime scenes and you don't touch a crime scene, right? Well, what happened the moment after they pulled the limo up to Parkland Hospital? The Secret Service starts wiping it all down. So there are no blood things, right?
Right.
And half these guys were former cops that would know that you don't do this, right? And they said, well, we didn't want the public to see this horrific thing and have these terrible photographs. We'll just park it in the garage where nobody can see it. And the fact of the matter is that if the bullet that killed Kennedy came from the back where Oswald was, there would have been blood all over the back of the front seats. There would have been blood on the Secret Service guy and the driver and the windshield. But most of the blood was behind Kennedy because the shot, as Oliver Stone says, came from the front. But that you can't tell that if the Secret Service wipes it down.
Right. Of course.
Right.
Wow.
You know,
Okay.
I could go on and on. And everybody thinks I have a problem. I equate passion with volume, so everybody thinks he's a nut. I wish I could be the really like Spock and tell you these things without getting this thing so you believe me. Because I come off as a kind of a nut, but it's just because I'm excited.
Well, we've got a great question from Pilgram Media that it's not about JFK, but I want to get to that too. But so I'm going to play this trailer for your film Nixed, and then you're going to tell us more about it.
Okay.
The only way to truly explain all this is for me to tell the whole story. I suppose this is my destiny. Die, Nixon, die! In that moment, I knew it. They wanted to kill me just like they killed JFK. Jack wanted peace with Cuba.
I like this new Kennedy.
I made peace with China. I call it my ping-pong diplomacy. He signed the nuclear test ban treaty with Khrushchev.
Mankind must put an end to war before war puts an end to mankind.
He's a goddamn John Steinbeck.
I forged the SALT Accord with Brezhnev. Did you guys have anything to do with John F. Kennedy's murder?
Yet.
For the exact same reasons. Whoever murdered Kennedy now wanted me dead too. There was only one way to save my own life.
The files you requested, Mr. President.
I had to find and expose,
Sorry to wake you, Henry, but I had to call.
the culprits who executed the greatest crime of the 20th century.
We're headed into nut country.
Before they got to me. I had to solve the murder of John F. Kennedy.
Damn, I forgot to take it off before our date.
Kennedy's gonna be sadder than a fat girl with no boobs.
Nixon? Not another one of his dumb plans. Are you out of your mind? The CIA and the Mafia are in bed together to kill Fidel.
I don't know why you're busting our balls. You and Jimmy are so alike. You both like to wear dark suits with white socks.
Don't you know Roselli and his pals are exactly the criminals this office is going after?
What does that little prick want? Goddamn pipsqueak. Little bastard needs a haircut.
I like Kennedy. I read his book. He's smart. Hey, Jack, I want you to meet a very special girl, Judy Campbell. Look at this.
Liberty, you think anyone will notice if I move the placement of the rear bullet wound 3 inches? It'll make it easier to solve the single bullet theory.
If I had the chance, I'd blow those bastards' goddamn brains out.
You killed the president, you rat!
Bang!
Being Tricky Dick finally paid off.
Well, I love that trailer. Now, how long did that take you to do from beginning to end?
It was about 4 years.
And you did it where you're sitting right now, right?
That's right. Well, actually, I mean, there's the area I really did it. But the greatest thing about it is that it was probably the most incredible auteur experience I had, because I only had one person giving me notes, right? And I got to work with all these great voice actors. The rest of it was me animating it. And if I go, that scene is a little slow, I need more coverage, all I would do is, instead of on a big movie, I'd go, well, you're done. You're not going back to that set. You're not getting all the coverage you need. I just drew it. I ended up, it probably would have taken me 3 years, but I realized that I had taken some images from Wiki Commons, which I thought I can use, right? But the lawyer that did sort of the check on it said that if you use anything in Wiki Commons, people can say, well, anything you use in Wiki Commons, people can use what you created from Wiki Commons. And so they go, theoretically, somebody could put your movie out saying you got some of it from Wiki Commons. So I had to change all the stuff. Like, I ended up tuning with Photoshop real photographs that were on Wiki Commons, and so I had to swap all those out and re-render and sometimes reanimate. And it was kind of a big pain in the ass. But the guy that was doing my clearances, right? Because they're saying, you don't want to libel anybody in here, right? And there are a few people that are still alive that I kind of make fun of, and he needed to check whether it was true, and I got everything cleared. So what you're seeing, 95% of it is probably true.
Well, I've noticed, you're wearing a red shirt that's very redolent of a uniform from Star Trek.
Am I the guy who dies?
I was going to say, you're wearing a red shirt, so maybe talking about conspiracy theories and the Kennedy assassination.
No, it's all about the glasses.
Okay, I'm just asking.
Saying. It was in the laundry. Earlier on, it didn't have the black collar. I was wearing a red shirt with the Spectre logo on it, because I like to be coordinated. I also have a T-shirt with Sean Connery on it, who is the William Shatner of spy movies.
And yes, he is. Yes, he is. Joshua Karp, by the way, has been a member of the channel for 23 months. Thank you, Joshua. Pilgram Media jumps back to something that you were talking about in terms of sex education. And he asks a question. What's the difference between sex education and grooming? And I have a quick answer, which is, learning about sex education has nothing to do with people grooming you for their own nefarious uses. I mean, everybody has to understand.
And if you were sexually educated, you would be more aware of somebody grooming you and having an alternative motive. I mean, one thing that I did put in Shoot 'em Up, right, is that, usually when there's a problem, it's where the money is. Whoever stands to earn the most money is most of the time the people that are causing the problems. And I wish that people, when they were trying to discern what was truth, is saying, who benefits, right? Even in mystery stories, who benefits from the murder? Who benefits from this being believed? And most of the time you can go back. If you believe it helps me get elected. If you believe I make more money, you believe I get more donations. And you need to separate, is the purpose the person is saying this altruistic or not? And I think that if people had better sex education, better critical thinking, they would be more protected because they are actually smarter people and less naive.
Well, I do think that's. I think it's a great question. I think it's also.
Go to Finland and ask them whether or not the Finns are grooming all these kids or young people because of the sex education. They have the lowest sex crimes. They have they have the less rape, less sexual harassment, because they've learned to understand and respect that it's something that happens between two people in love.
Yeah, and just in general, human sexuality, we're afraid of it. We're still puritanical in this country when it comes, and
I have this thing that it drives me nuts, but all of this hoopla and controversy ultimately comes down to 6 inches of skin rubbing against 6 inches of skin, maybe 7 or 8 if you're Rob.
Oh, I wish.
But it's like it's all. What are
That's
you
why I'm a
talking
cunning
about?
linguist.
So upset about skin rubbing against skin. What And
there's ramification. There's all kinds of societal but it comes.
Ramifications.
But yeah, we're still puritanical here. We can't even we can't even deal with human sexuality.
I can't even read James Bond books in 6th grade without my dad snipping it out.
Yeah, I mean, if my parents knew what, although my parents I don't think would have, they're just happy I'm reading. I mean, even horror novels like Revenge of the Manitou, the sex scenes that Graham Masterton wrote were epic. And as an 11-year-old, I really appreciate British horror authors for that very reason. T.O. Morrow, speaking of DC Comics, hi Rob and Michael. It might have been better if the MCU concentrated on one alternate universe rather than multiple universes, bringing, say, the Squadron Supreme into the MCU, that's kind of their version of the Justice League, would have done this nicely. Yeah, I mean, look.
I like that idea because then you can understand it. And the fun about multiverses or alternate universes is you get to compare what the one universe to the other, and it's always really fun to see what would happen if things had changed, and that makes it fun. But you can't do that in a multiverse. I love that idea.
Yeah, I think it is a good idea, but again, it would have to be established and things like that. Our friend Irene Jobson, who has a dirty mind, but she says, "Conspire away, my friend."
See, she's a conspiracy realist.
Yes. Well, to me, it's funny because, like you said, it's always about the money. Who benefits? Who's, and unfortunately, I sometimes kind of am bummed out by that because I really wish that I would really like it if Satan himself came up from the Stygian depths of hell and he wanted to consume humanity because he wanted their souls because it would re-energize him to maybe retake his place in heaven. But it's never like that. It's only about money. And why do people want money? Just because they want to sleep with hot people, drive hot cars, go to hot places, wear bespoke suits. I mean, it's never like, even people that want to be really, really filthy rich, it's only for selfish sort of fleeting.
Have the ultimate fun that they think is the ultimate fun.
Yeah, that's at the ultimate fun, and that's what it really comes down to. Whereas, look, man, I want to go to the stars before I die. I want to download my consciousness on my deathbed, if I still have all my marbles, put my consciousness in a generational starship, so I'll live in a virtual world for 100 years or 1,000 years, however long it takes to make the crossing, and put my consciousness into a starship that I need to run for, to get to Alpha Centauri for the first time. I'd rather do something like that than just kick off this mortal coil. I wish we were doing.
Who knows what it is? But I kind of have this idea that when you die, you basically, all the stuff that happens in your dreams, which is not real, but is sort of like heaven and hell mixed together, that's what's going to happen. And so you are going to live in a dreamlike state where you're going to be crossing the universe and commanding a starship. You don't have to put your consciousness in there in a ship to make that happen. It's going to happen just because of your spirit is going to have all that information and manifest that for you.
But I mean, I literally want to stay in the physical world, even if it's as my brain being digitized as digital data, to actually exist where I know that I could interface with real human beings on a generational starship that's traveling, like in the movie Passengers. I would like to be that robot in Passengers that's controlling the starship, as long as I had my own digital environments to go hang out in.
It's so funny because just as you like Star Trek and I prefer Star Wars and James Bond, it's consistent because your version of space and the future is something based in more reality and grounded. And my idea is when I die is I'm going to live in a world where I'm like a secret agent and it's a wish fulfillment, an escapist world. And so it's still consistent with what we want to do when we die, is consistent with your choice of liking Star Trek and me liking...
it's true.
I was going to say, but I did want to go back, which is interesting, is sometimes people think, oh, Kennedy dying, it would have been better if he had lived. Well, the interesting thing is that Kennedy and his brother wanted to enact all this great civil rights legislation, but they didn't have the experience of getting laws through Congress. And they had a very stormy relationship with LBJ, who was before he became vice president, was the most powerful head of the Senate ever. And they say that when Kennedy got killed, the sympathy that LBJ and the Democrats had for his death gave an extra catalyst to help LBJ and the Democrats pass more civil rights legislation than if Kennedy had lived. Not that I'm saying it's a good thing, but Kennedy did a lot of great things, but he wasn't as experienced at how to get government to work. But LBJ was a real prick, and there were a lot of things about him. But the one thing he did do was help with civil rights. But I think he did that more out of ego and his legacy than it really caring about the effects of it.
Our longtime viewer Alexander Wilson has a good question. Rob, can you ask Michael Davis about his thoughts on Everything Everywhere All at Once, since it's a multiverse movie that won the Best Picture?
Oh, well, so you're going to kill me, okay?
Oh, I'm not going to kill you.
My wife and I started watching it. My wife loved it, and I loved what I saw. And maybe I saw it too late, but I started nodding off. And so... and I felt like some of the sequences got a little bit repetitious, but I do have to say that I love the fact that it won Best Picture, because I hate it when all these smart, snooty, arty movies win Best Picture. And I love that something that is wild and escapist that won Best Picture. But I'm not as great a geek and genuine geek as Rob is, because Rob would never have fallen asleep in that movie, and I did. And I should have gone back and see it, and I'm not worthy, but I'm glad it won Best Picture. Is that fair enough?
It's fair to me.
Yeah, I know.
No,
I'm a fraud. I'm a semi-geek.
Stubble McShave, our friend Stubble, all the way, who's a big reader, by the way, from Sweden, says... There's a problem with not knowing which movies and series to watch before an MCU movie. That's another reason why MCU should have been rebooted after Endgame. If a 10-year-old wants to watch Secret Invasion, how will he know what movies to watch as quote-unquote homework? Do you think that's a problem, this extended universe that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger?
Well, all I can say is I have a great friend, Kevin Ross, who edited a bunch of my movies. And he edited on Stranger Things. He's editing on the One Piece series. And he and his kids, since they were little, were watching the MCU and all the Star Wars stuff on their Friday night family movie night. And so they've watched everything multiple times from the Marvel Universe. Now, maybe all families don't have the time to do it, but I do believe that part of it is that Marvel is banking on the fact that, the fact of the matter is except for maybe the past couple of years, their product has been fantastic. I mean, very consistent. It's totally worth your $10. And I think they're banking on people. Everybody is going to watch almost all their content and be caught up. And also, good movies should stand alone. And most movies, if I jump into a movie series, usually they do a good job of saying, you know what, if you didn't watch the one before, you can still kind of get it. And I think that, I don't know. I think you probably just have to be a nut for the MCU and watch everything.
No, I think so too. And since you're here, you've actually worked in Hollywood and you're still working in Hollywood, there's a couple of great letters that I wanted to share. And one of those, there's a couple of these on Indiana Jones. And you and I had talked about Indiana Jones, and you had some thoughts. But I have 2 letters. One comes from our own moderator, Tom Jr. Jackson. And he says, "Hey, Rob and crew. In regards to episode 57 of Midnight Musings, I have some thoughts on the new Indiana Jones film. I enjoyed the film, and I'll explain why. This was a film that kept me on the edge of my seat wondering how it was going to end. And I love that about the film. The film is basically about Indy being a broken man, dealing with an impending divorce, the death of his son, and retirement. It was a film about getting older and being older. Watching James Mangold explain that it took him a year to rewrite the film because there wasn't anything there, and coming up with a better script, which I think was cool. I like that he was dragged into this situation, unlike the previous films, where he's on a mission for a museum, but I think Indy needed it. He needed that push to see that even though he's old, he still has life left in him, and to me, that was the theme behind this film. Now, you say you want to believe what you see in a movie, which is fine and all, but what happened to just going and enjoying seeing a film? It feels like all people do is look for ways to tear down a film these days, even before it's put in front of the camera. Why is that? Why must people feel the need to do that, or spoil the film before anyone has seen it? I know they do it for views on YouTube, but what joy is there in ruining the experience for those who haven't seen it? Because what it becomes is a big echo chamber, and I've seen people say that they will only see a film depending on what so-and-so says. What happened to one's own opinion? To me, and again, this is my opinion, if people didn't like it, fine, but I enjoy the film because this was one of my favorite characters in another adventure for possibly the last time. I enjoyed it because it was a love letter to the Indy series. I think sometimes people forget to just watch a movie and enjoy it, and not watch it to point out the flaws. By the way, there was nothing wrong with the way Karen Allen looked. She looked like a woman who was the age that she is, which is 71, and she still looks great. She was just in my hometown on June 24th. I have no ill will towards those who don't like the film, but I do think people should at least see a film before complaining about it, because if you don't see a film, you can't complain about it. Thanks, Rob, for giving me this moment to write about this. By the way, just a question in the channel. Oh, pick. I don't see what the pick is, Tom. I'm sorry. Well, Tom, I thought that's a great question. And let me ask you, Michael, I mean, and I would preface this by saying you and I are both James Bond movie fans. I'm a fanatical James Bond movie fan. And we know that the James Bond series as a whole is quite spotty in terms of its quality. Like, for instance, I'm only a fan of one of Daniel Craig's Bond films. I loved Casino Royale. I'm even a Quantum of Solace apologist. I am not a fan of. I am not of the other 3. Everyone loves Skyfall. I did not, because it's a movie where Bond fails and fails and fails and fails and fails again. But the Bond film franchise is not the greatest in terms of quality. But at the same time, I love the Bond franchise. I find something to love in all of it, the good and the bad. So I would ask you to in response to Tom's letter, how did you feel about Dial of Destiny, and what do you feel about franchises like Indiana Jones or James Bond overall?
Well, I have this thing. I have the holy trinity of action heroes, which is James Bond, Indiana Jones, and Neo from the Matrix movies, the first movie. I also have to say that Indiana Jones is my second favorite action hero. When Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, I dressed up as Indiana Jones, and I got on local television after the Friday night screening. And then when Shoot 'Em Up came out, 25 years later, the same reviewer who had interviewed me there was still on the air, and I went and visited him and talked to him about remembering that day 25 years ago. It's pretty cool. And I would say this about Indiana Jones and what you said about James Bond is the world is better when there's a James Bond or an Indiana Jones movie in it. I saw that there were negative reviews about it, but I didn't look at any of them until I went to see Dial of Destiny. And I have lots of problems with it, but I was glad. I enjoyed the ride. I'm glad that I went there. I also have to tell you what really redeemed the movie for me is the last scene with Karen Allen, that I actually teared up. It was actually made, if that scene wasn't in the movie, I probably would even have a stronger response. I would say two things about the people that are negative, and it goes to any situation, but it certainly is the case in Hollywood. Let's say you're having a meeting about a script, and there's 10 people there, and nine people say, I love the script, it's fantastic, I love this. And the one person that's the naysayer, I don't like this. The naysayer gets all the weight, all the importance. That outweighs 9 other people saying, this is great. But the one person that says they don't like it, then all of a sudden you change it for the one person that doesn't like it, rather than saying you're the weirdo, everybody else loves it, get out of here, you're an idiot. And so I do think there is an element in just human nature that being negative carries more punch than being positive. And again, I go back to, maybe if people were taught earlier on to be that positivity has such a greater effect on people, or is a much greater force for helping things get better, that maybe people would be less negative. I do say that maybe part of it is that, I read an article that all the other Raiders movies are compared to the first one, and the first one is the best. But everybody has this hope that they're going to have that same experience, and when it doesn't deliver, they start thinking by their own standards or the things that they like, right? That they go, well, it could have been this, it could have been that, and basically maybe the reason they're negative is that the film showed them a potential in their minds. And because they saw this potential, this vision on the horizon, this mirage that they wanted to see, it gets them so upset that they weren't fulfilled by it. Maybe some of the negativity is that they so wanted it to be this way that their hurt or disappointment turns into negativity and they can't. I don't know. But I certainly, I've been very disappointed with the J.J. Abrams Star Wars, but I kept going, oh my God, this is going to be the one that recreates my experience of, the first time. And a lot of times you also can't recreate the first time. I mean, you look at The Matrix, the first Matrix movie, such a great idea that it was impossible, because I didn't know what The Matrix was when I went in. When I saw it, I was blown away.
Oh, dude, that was the last time. Because nobody did. We're coming off of Johnny Mnemonic that nobody liked. Yeah. But seeing Robert Longo's movie, dude, I went and saw somebody got me a ticket, and I went to see Matrix on the Warner lot at the Steve Ross Theater. Mm-hmm. And I'd go, I'll see anything on the Warner lot at the Steve Ross Theater, because the sound system's incredible, and it's just great. And we're all standing in line, and everybody was kind of bagging on the Matrix, thinking, oh, Keanu Reeves, like, really? And we're all kind of, and it was all industry people, and everybody's just kind of there. And I have never had an experience in a movie theater since then where my jaw was on the floor.
Yep.
Like when he wakes up, the red pill, blue pill scene.
Yep.
When he wakes up, I literally, the misdirect on all of that, I was blown. Not just because the action was incredible and I'm seeing visual effects that I've never seen before, bullet time and all of that, but the storyline was so jaw-dropping to me. And we've seen so many movies. We're always way ahead of the movies that we're watching. I was not ahead of The Matrix.
I was not, and you could never recreate that in the sequels. It was almost like it was just impossible for the follow-ups to be anything compared to it. But the other thing is, maybe The Matrix would have been ruined by the internet if it had been released later, if the internet was better.
It totally would have been.
And so they got lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had a lot of fun in movies. Like I would say, Infinity War, as far as the MCU goes, Infinity War delivered. Like in terms of seeing my childhood realized on screen, being a comic book fan and all that. In 2012, when Avengers came out, I sat there in the theater thinking, I didn't think Avengers was a perfect film. It was a lot of fun. It was good, but it didn't matter, because the whole thing about Avengers was I couldn't believe I was watching it. But to me, Infinity War was the promise of this big crossover superhero event. I couldn't believe how good it was. I couldn't believe how entertaining it was. I just sat there thinking to myself, maybe I'll never feel this way again. But The Matrix and Infinity War were, because it was the culmination of everything that I wanted writ large on the big screen. I sat there watching Infinity War thinking, I can't believe this movie exists. I
beg everybody, because I just saw a movie 2 months ago in my top 5 action movies of all time. This movie, Sisu.
Dude.
It's shot. What is it? Finnish, but it's shot in English, so it's like you're watching an English movie, language movie, or it is English language. But the action in that is so clever. It's like, if you want to see how you felt in Raiders of the Lost Ark, like how the hell is he going to get out of that, or a great James Bond movie, it is just so fun and so escapist, but it never gets too big. And you can rent it now. It's still probably in the theaters too. And it's, a hero against the asshole Nazis. And it is just so much fun.
It is.
Sisu, S-I-S-U.
Oh, dude, it kicks ass.
And it's the Finnish term for someone who is so determined even when there's no hope. It's Sisu.
That's so good.
That's what that guy is. It's awesome.
Garfield's.
We can talk more about Dial of Destiny. I mean,
no, we will. We're going to get into that more because I have another letter. But Garfield's Bizarre Adventure says, "Hey Rob, I'm enjoying this channel and discussions, whether it's pop culture or political, even religious and spiritual, even if I agree or not." Well, thanks, Garfield Bizarre Adventures. I appreciate that. I think that one of the things that if you're a filmmaker or you like movies or you like books or science fiction, it's always so strange to me when people say, "Oh, I don't like to talk about politics." Well, I think that all storytelling dips into the political. I mean, I understand people don't want to talk about my politics or their politics, but I think a general discussion of, when you're talking about Captain America as a character, you have to talk about a little bit of politics because it's Captain America. And when you talk about Civil War, you're talking, at least in the film version, the Sokovia Accords, and you're talking about the difference between superheroes having to register with the government or not. That's a political conversation, even though it's in the context of superheroes. I love having those conversations because that's why science fiction, Rod Serling used the Twilight Zone to delve into politics and social issues of the day, but he was able to get through to everybody because it was in the Twilight Zone. So it's not our real world, it's the Twilight Zone.
Well, I think that if we, again, teach people to have critical thinking and they develop the skill set to have good conversations, people could talk about politics without ruining the Thanksgiving dinner. But my question is, how do people get educated and how do we move forward if people can't talk when they have opposing views? How are we ever going to get the good ideas across? And
that's the whole raison d'etre of this whole channel, is about talking.
Right. But I get really frustrated because people if they actually studied their history a little bit, they would understand where where we are today. When Newt Gingrich was, the head honcho there in Congress, he actually decided that every Republican had to vote 100%, they had a 100% purity test, that they all had to vote their way, the one way. And that's when it used to be both parties would go after the day and they fought on the floor of the Congress. They would all go to dinner. They would go to the bars. They would talk. They would exchange ideas. There was this free-flowing ideas because they no longer were guys on separate sides of the aisle. They were all people that were drinking buddies, and they would get ideas, and then they'd couple together. I took this idea, and they would come up. But now our guys don't go out for drinks. They don't have dinner together because then it looks like you're fraternizing with the enemy. And so there's zero communication. But if you understood your history, you could see that this whole 100% purity thing, which is never a good idea to have 100% purity of anything.
Especially amongst the Catholic girls I dated in high school. No, I'm just kidding.
Is that, that was one of the origins of the separation and the lack of dialogue, right? But the thing is, nobody wants to go back and do their history and then say, well, that maybe that wasn't a good idea. And I want to work with people with good ideas. And I don't know where we're going to ever be able. We're not the people that you and I and the people that are grown adults or even teenagers. We're already have the neural pathways burned to behave this way. The only way we're going to get change is if we start with the younger generation that is not born angry and hating the other side, that is our total open books, and teaching them to have very positive discourses about multiple sides of a certain issue.
Well, I see that happening.
Fix it with the people that we're all fucked. We're all indoctrinated now. We can evolve and be better, but the problems you gotta fix. You don't put a Band-Aid on it. You gotta cure it.
I agree.
It's too frustrating.
Pilgram Media says, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy analyst. That comes to us from...
I love that. That's great.
Gore Vidal said that.
Oh, okay. But here's the thing I have to say. Let's say there are 1,000 conspiracy theories and they're all like, most of them are just totally crazy or some are a little credible. Don't you think one of them is actually true? Or they can't all be wrong and just be conspiracies that are untrue. One of them or a few of them have to be true. It can't be that they're all from kooks. The question
it's true. That's a great point. I have another letter. One of my favorite members of I don't know if she's a member. I suspect she goes by another name, but I'm not sure. But we know her in the chat as Science Lady.
Okay.
And she wrote another. She's a very learned woman. I very much enjoy her commentary. Science Lady says, yesterday I watched Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The day before, I saw an interview with Harrison Ford and his take on what he wanted from the movie and how the character should be in 1969. I find myself agreeing, surprisingly. He wished to portray how age had affected him, unkindly because getting old is rubbish. You can't do the things you wanted to do. I've been witness to some terrible things during the war, endured the loss of a child, and he endured. Do the things you want to do, been witness to some terrible things during the war, endured the loss of a child and other people in his life. Also, what must have irked him was seeing the Nazis he fought against living in the USA, working freely in science even though they had committed terrible atrocities. This is actually true. I'm an Indiana Jones fan. Wanted to be him. Travel the world, go off in search of adventures. I love the movie for what it was. It's not the best in the franchise, and admittedly, I am biased. One of the most poignant bits of the movie was when he looked into the astronaut's eyes. I believe he saw himself. Would love to have kept adventuring, maybe go to space, and although they are heroes of the hour in our year 2023, they too would no longer be celebrated like the adventurers in the past, such as Ernest Hemingway, Howard Carter, and David Livingstone, who were once the rock stars of their generation. I have been in classes where the teacher is very well-renowned scientist, and it doesn't matter to some pupils. They just want the extra credit to add to their degree. Others would have been excited in having a Jones type of character teaching. I would have loved it. I could believe some of the students being bored, but not everyone. I was very happy that they used Archimedes as their historical character. How many people watching the film knew who he was? Some may now go online to read about him, although I would prefer to people read a book, but it's still fantastic. I don't get the hate for Phoebe Waller-Bridge, especially if one has only watched her in Solo. Fleabag is funny. I think Fleabag's great, actually. In fact, her character is awful. She's a very talented writer and credited for the first series of Killing Eve. The politicking of people is becoming problematic just because the guy in the pub says she's a horrible left-wing feminist who doesn't like men. Well, then it must be true. It is the reason I left Twitter. I read some terrible stuff. I'm a feminist and I'm left-wing. I don't give a shit what people think of me. If the person next to me is a conservative, my critique of the work they produced will be judged on merit and not their politics or beliefs. People should live, let live, and be kind. I think I am leaving science, not enough money, to teach in high school. Hopefully do research part-time. I guess I am still following Dr. Jones. And that comes to us from Science Lady. Green-eyed lady. What do you think about that, Michael?
You know, I have this thing I told my wife, and I tell the Science Lady, mankind is so fucking dumb. Can you imagine if there hadn't been so much prejudice and tamping down of women becoming equals to men? We would have that 50% of our brain power throughout and talent for the entire length of civilization has not been able to be harnessed. Think about all the advances of medicine, art, and literature, and politics. If we had made women equal, they're still not equal, from the beginning. 50% of mankind's brain power, the brain is the greatest thing ever, and we have not harnessed half of it for the entire span of mankind. And it makes me so damn mad about, I mean, again, it's like, it's all these things that happened in the past, but I don't understand why we can't say everybody should know now that it doesn't matter the chassis that the computer is in, the brain, the computer in there is all equal, is all awesome, and it doesn't matter what the outside shell of it is, whether you're black or white, Jewish, Christian, man, woman, the brain is this magic super thing, and we should celebrate and promote, because that's the way things get better, is that we get those brains going. And it makes me so mad that somebody would criticize her on Twitter and also make her feel bad, because those people are the fucking morons of the world. That why are we even still having a conversation? I understand why, but it shouldn't be. We waste all this time on gender politics when we should be working on feeding people and global warming, because we should know by now everybody's equal. The brain is awesome. So I don't know. It just drives me nuts.
I agree with that as well. I mean, looking in this country,
so
how many people, how many Einsteins didn't get to be Einstein because they were black in the United States, and we could have had the smartest person alive living in somebody who was born black in 1950 during Jim Crow. Still, we had Jim Crow era, and because of the hardship that our own society imposed on that kid, never became the Einstein he was supposed to be, or she was supposed to be.
Yeah, and then they didn't take advantage of their opportunities, or the parents thought, oh, women aren't supposed to go to college, or women aren't supposed to do that, or all those things. Think about, in 100 AD, we didn't have any of that, and everybody was doing everything. Everybody had the freedom to go out and achieve what they wanted. Think about how much we would have achieved over all those centuries. It's just such a waste.
Well, it's like look what's happening in France. Again, they're having sort of their own George Floyd moment, but France is I've always thought of France as one of the cradles of human accomplishment, human civilization, in a certain way, in terms of art especially. Whether it's the culinary arts, whether it's the fine arts, call it what you want. And yet there's a society that's at war with itself because, and I guess we all are to a certain extent. But I agree with you. I mean, I'm frustrated that I'm probably going to shuffle off this mortal coil without living amongst the stars. Like, that's what I thought when I was a kid. I'm like, why aren't we doing that? Why are human beings, I mean, like you said, we have been nowadays, gender identity issues seem to be over this overreaching, or over, they're not that they're not important, but so much of our social discourse is being taken up by that, I think by design. So look, I think, like you said, people need to be able to flourish, and the human brain is something that we should be cultivating on a global scale, because who knows what innovation, who knows what 10-year-old kid's his imagination's gonna be fired, or her imagination, or their imagination is going to be fired up because of something, and you never know what that is, where that's going to take them, and where that's going to lead for the human race.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many, they have this thing that, oh, you can't tell me how to raise my child and all that stuff. Okay, I understand that. But, you have to get a manual to learn how to drive a car. You have to get licensed to become, have to pass the bar to become a lawyer. But the most important thing in terms of forming a person is how they're raised. And like, not everybody knows that the more a kid is held as a baby and a young child and told that they're loved, the more positive self-esteem they have. The brain develops better, it develops faster when they are held. And why isn't there a thing that out there just saying, you know what? When you have a baby, make sure you hold it and love it and keep it warm and all that stuff, because it affects brain development. Why isn't there like a little bit of a pamphlet telling everybody these universal things? It's like the basic thing.
It's like that. You remember Ron Howard's movie Parenthood?
Yeah.
There's something to it. It's something. Keanu Reeves, going back to Keanu Reeves, he's kind of played as this dunder-headed character in the whole movie, and I'm paraphrasing. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, and he says, you need a license to fish, and you need a license to hunt, but any asshole can become a parent. He thinks about it. He goes, "Whoa," something to that effect.
Yeah.
No, and we don't do enough of that. Stephen Langford asked me if I pre-ordered Sleepy Hollow on 4K. I did. I don't love the film. I think the movie's good, but I appreciate the way it's beautifully made. I really like the way it's made, so I had to order. Dan Candy says, reconciling with your wife after the death of your only child is not a happy ending. It's just a less sad ending. Dial of Destiny was a disappointment.
Well, here's the thing that to answer the question, why are people upset about it, is we find out at the beginning of the story, Indy is sad because he didn't do a good job being there for Marion to deal with the loss of their son. He was an absent partner, right? And at the end of the movie, Marion comes back. She's there with him. But Indy has not done anything in the movie to demonstrate to her that he has changed and he's going to be there for her. So the actual change in his elevated, at the end, he's at a higher point than at the beginning of the story, but his actions didn't get there. I don't know what happened off screen with, Phoebe Waller, telling Marion he went through this, he needs you. He needed to take action to win her back, but she just shows up sort of willy-nilly. And if the story is about him dealing with being a better partner and supporting Marion, nothing in the story supports that ending and that change of his life at the end of the story. And that's bad storytelling. And we could fix that in a lunch. And that's what makes people mad, is how can all these filmmakers from Lucasfilm to, James Mangold, who's done these great movies, not see? You set up a problem and then it's resolved at the end, but nothing in the middle supports that character change. There needs to be steps that lead to, right? And again, I'm going to be a big proponent of this John Truby. He basically says you don't do a 3-act structure, you do 22 steps. And some of those steps is a first revelation, second revelation, third revelation, and a self-revelation. And the self-revelation is the things that you realize your belief system is wrong and you need to change, and that leads to an elevated position. There are no revelations for Indy in the movie, and he seems to be very easily drawn into it. I mean, why would he even open up this relic, the half of the thing, and give it to her when he knows she's already kind of abusing and obsessed with her dad's obsession with the dial, and that no good can come from it? Why does he even give it to her, especially if he's so resistant? There's nothing that happens that makes him realize, right? Maybe if the Nazis knew it was there and broke in, and he had to stop the Nazis to get the dial, and then he has to go with Phoebe reluctantly, but it's the only way to get it from the Nazis, that would make sense that they would go to the library and get the dial. But just to go in there, hey, your dad gave this to me, and he told me to destroy it, and I didn't. Oh, and then she takes it from him. That's stupid. But their solutions are just so easy if you sit down and it doesn't change locations, doesn't cost any more money, and in fact creates more conflict within action sequences to give the action sequences meaning to the character development and the plot. And so the thing that happens is that I guess there's too many. I know that when I'm in a committee situation and nobody can decide, and most of the people are not as educated as about story, or not, there isn't sort of a some people think there's a 3-act structure. Some people read Sid Field. Some people, most studio execs don't even learn about story structure. They go, I've watched enough movies. I know what makes a good story. So there isn't a universal or shared body of belief system of what makes a good story work. So when somebody has a good idea, but somebody uneducated isn't educated, they aren't smart enough to recognize that this is a good idea, or they're not smart enough to know that something's missing. And so then you get into this committee thing, and I know at a certain point, you can't educate somebody. Number one, they don't want to be educated because then it makes them look weak and it hurts their job. So they can't admit that they're wrong. They got to hold on to it, right? Oh, and I'm going to go back. I'm on a okay.
But go on to it because the John Truby thing I think is really really interesting in the sense.
What I was going to say is I just at a certain point when you're in a situation and it's nobody can decide, it becomes so debilitating that you decide, well, I want to make the movie, I want to move it forward, and even if it's a bad idea, at least we agreed on something and we move on. And that's how good stuff gets worse and worse and worse, is out of this fatigue, because you can never win. You've heard this thing, you can never win an argument with an idiot. And if a lot of studio people are idiots, you're never going to win. So you either have a choice of leaving the film, which then makes you, you're a problem filmmaker because you wanted to do your idea. And the filmmaker can't come out and say, no, this person was an idiot, and they said this stupid thing and this stupid thing, and that's why I'm leaving. They always demonize the creative guy that leaves. So your choice is either be demonized or you stay and try to muddle through it and kind of cobble these little alliances to get a little, okay, somebody made a decision. Okay, we'll do that. I know we're not telling the story about why India's old. This scene would have helped us, but they don't want that. But at least they agreed, so I can go and move, film it in another country where they're not going to bother me for a while, except when they call about the dailies. And so at a certain point, there's a fatigue that happens because it's either I get to do something I love, making movies, even though I hate so much of it because I have to deal with all these idiots.
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm going to tell you my story, and this is the ultimate story for people to tell you. This is there's two stories, right? A friend of mine, now I'm not going to tell the story. I'm going to just tell I had the rights to Dance Dance Revolution. And I made this sizzle reel, right? And basically there was a character from the future, and he lives in a world where there's no song and dance. It's very draconian, right? And he ends up getting these magic shoes or dance pad that he does the certain code, like the Dance Dance Revolution code. And he goes back in time, right? And he loves our world because there's dance and singing and on the radio and clubs and everything. And at the end of the story, right, he has to go back home, kind of like in Back to the Future, and he's being chased by all the, robots from the future. And the girl he falls in love with, they have to say goodbye, but they express their love in this amazing dance. And the whole world now is watching because they've never seen these giant robots. And the entire world is watching these guys dance. And the dance is so infectious. They start dancing in Tokyo. They dance in Moscow. They dance in Oklahoma, right? And it's basically a worldwide dance revolution. And when the guy goes back to the future because he's changed the past, his world is no longer draconian. Everybody sings and dances. He's changed the future, okay? So I show it to my exec on the project. He goes, I love this. Let me show it to my boss. I show it to my boss, and the boss says, oh my God, this is genius. I love your trailer. I love this worldwide Dance Dance Revolution. Then we go to pitch Konami North America. They go, we've been pitched hundreds of things. This is the only one that we love, right? but we actually have to get an okay from the home office. So I actually went to Japan. I showed it to the home office, and the Japanese always say maybe to you, but never say yes. They just maybe you to death. They said yes in the room, so they would give me the shopping rights for free at Konami. The whole big board of directors, we love your idea, all right? So I come back to LA, and and now I have to flesh out my story. And so the young exec who had seen it, I showed it to him. He saw the trailer, the time travel thing, right? It changes the future. He saw it first. He sat with me he watched it with his boss twice. He was there when I showed it to Konami, so I know he's seen the trailer at least 4 or 5 times, right? Mm-hmm. So then I have this meeting with him where I'm telling the fleshed out story, and I go through the whole thing. And after I pitched him, he goes, "I didn't know this movie had time travel in it." And all I'm going to tell you, I mean, I lost it. I usually am more diplomatic, and I said, you know what? You either, I say, you either have the worst memory in the world or you are dumb. You are just dumb. You are dumb. I just told him, I couldn't say, how can you, I said, you've seen it 4 times. You saw the trailer. We went down to, Laguna to pitch Konami. You saw the trailer. There was time travel there. You've seen the video. You've had the quick time. You've seen it, right? How can you say that you didn't know the movie had time travel in it? You must be dumb. Right? Now, think about this is not uncommon in Hollywood, right? And so if you're dealing with these people, right? Right? Sometimes that's the worst level, but on some degree, like when we went out and pitched, I pitched to Paramount, right? And they wanted to know, I said, look, he time travels because, in Dance Dance Revolution, you have the dance pad, right? Well, the guy actually is a great dancer. He does the right combination and creates all this energy that creates the time travel that goes back in time, right? Because it was actually invented by the girl he fell in love with, his dad. And one of the executives, which
is basically, it's the cosmic treadmill from the Flash that allowed him to, but it's the Dance Dance Revolution pads.
Right. And so everybody who's seen time travel movies or know about all the tropes. So I'm in a meeting at Universal with these young executives, and they ask me, well, what is the science? How does the time travel work? And I said, well, it basically works like a flux capacitor. And they go, what's a flux capacitor?
At Universal.
Scientific thing. What? No, it was at Paramount, right?
Oh, you were Paramount. Okay.
They don't understand genre movies. They don't understand science fiction movies, right? They don't even understand basic story tropes. And these are the people that, right? And then when they ask, and I go, well, have you seen Back to the Future? Oh, maybe, I don't really remember. I said, it's a MacGuffin. It doesn't really matter. It's like movie science. They just go back to, the story is about him going back to the past and falling in love with a girl who loves to dance. Right? It doesn't matter whether there's real life science to be. It's like,
well, it's funny.
I'm just telling you, this is why bad movie, even James Mangold makes a bad movie, because at a certain point, you're surrounded by people that don't work as hard, right? And so sometimes you just go, well, I like making movies, I want to get paid, and I don't want to seem like the pain in the ass guy. And that's why sometimes there's a little bit of luck when a good movie comes about, or I know that there are people that are tyrants, that are auteurs, and they make bad movies because nobody's telling them boo. They don't criticize them, and they make bad movies because they think they know everything and they're not taking any criticism. Or they're movies made by committee. But the chances are of making a great movie is when you have a singular vision. Back to the Future, Zemeckis and Gale, the writer was the director. Great movie, right? Well,
and also a movie that completely understands that time travel must, in order to be a great story, has to be personal. Why you're traveling through time, it should never be about the universe. It has to have a personal. There must be personal stakes within the time travel story, and Marty McFly when he travels through time, it's not personal until, in the past, he inadvertently interferes with his own beginnings, his own origin, his own inception. He stops his parents from meeting. So he's now the whole version through time. The whole dilemma is that this Marty McFly has interfered with the flow of time, destroying his own existence.
Right, but I'll go back to my whole Troopy thing. Is they did set up Marty's problem is he lacks confidence. He even says, well, you know, what if I audition and I'm no good?
Oh, yeah. And also there's a lot of things like his parents don't understand him. But
the origin of his lack of confidence is his dad's lack of confidence.
Yes.
Right? He sees his dad weak in front of his dad, and that's his ghost. That's the thing that happened in the past that affects his problem now. What is haunting him? Well, his parents are losers, right? And now he thinks he's going to be a loser. The great thing about the movie is when he goes back to the past, he's actually confronting his literal ghost. The thing that's haunting him is his parents. And that's what makes it really powerful. It hits that story point of what's the hero's ghost, what's haunting him in a big way. The whole thing in the past is about, you know, how do I do that?
And then his whole adventure is all of his qualities are utilized to his advantage in the past, whether it's playing the guitar, whether it's being smart and teaching George McFly how to meet a pretty girl, whether it's dressing up as Darth Vader, his ingenuity. And it was only in his journey to the past that Marty McFly gains that all of that confidence that he needs, and and then of course by doing that he gets to affect even his parents' lives in an interesting way.
Yeah, you know how I talk about how you.
It's Back to the Future is a perfect movie and a
perfect fun movie.
And the screenplay is perfect as well.
Well, yeah, but remember the first screenplay. Let me come back. First I'm going to say is, you know how I talked about stories having a first revelation, second revelation, third and self-revelation. The first revelation Marty has is his dad's not a loser. His dad's creative. His dad wants to write science fiction stories. His dad is creative. He's got all these great ideas. He's excited about this vision he has of himself. That's a story point where the character has a real revelation that's going to change his belief system. It's the first step of changing his belief system, and the story needs to have those steps. And like going back to Dial of Destiny, when Indy says, oh, Marion left me because I wasn't supportive of her when our son died. That's a great revelation to the audience and a great revelation to Phoebe, but it's not a revelation for the main character, right?
Right.
And a better version would be is somehow in the adventure, he never knows why Marion couldn't get over it or why, right? And maybe, you know, he has a revelation. He finally realized she didn't just lose her son, but she lost her husband, at least metaphorically. And he realizes that. Then that's a real revelation, but he's basically speaking about the revelation that he already had off screen years ago, which is unimportant to the storytelling.
Right.
And James Mangold should know that.
I don't disagree with you. But again, you're serving.
I didn't know this movie had time travel in it. That guy's a nut. He's a conspiracy theorist.
Here's the thing, though. James Mangold has to deal with Disney, has to deal with Lucasfilm, has to deal with all of this stuff. I mean, and let me ask you this: since we're talking about this, do you think? Because I think, how do you justify spending $300+ million on any movie, regardless? Fast X, they spent $350 million on it. Indiana Jones, people are saying it's been underreported. It might cost between $350 million as well. How don't you think that there's absolutely no possible way? I mean, unless you're going to gross. I mean, James Cameron said, well, in order for Avatar: The Way of Water to make any money at all, it has to gross $2 billion. Well, lucky for him, it did, but because he's James Cameron. But these movies, it does. If you grossed $2 billion, it's still, isn't it irresponsible to spend $350 million on any movie?
I have a clearer example in the CGI world. and it's probably a little bit muddier, but still translates to the live action movie. I have a ton of friends that work at Pixar, okay? And, like, do you remember this movie that came out, 9? It was a CGI movie.
Yes.
Okay, that movie cost about $10 million. Now, whether you like the story or whatever, the visuals were on par with a Disney or a Pixar movie. Their CGI was beautiful, production value, animation was smooth and sumptuous. The thing cost $10 million, right? People, when they were making DreamWorks movies with Katzenberg there, is they would animate the movie, right? And remember, when they make these movies, they film the static storyboards, then they do these animatic storyboards.
Yep.
Then they start animating, and the editor, every day when they get a wireframe shot that's not rendered out, it's still Tom Hanks with an animated wireframe Woody. You can still see the movie. You can tell. You hear the dialogue, and I gotta tell you that most of the emotion, whenever I get quivery in a movie, it's because what I hear in the voice. Not so much the visuals. A crying voice makes me sad. But they would have the whole movie in some kind of rough form or wireframe form, and it takes a buttload of time and money to render it out sumptuously. Well, when they would get a third of the movie done of a DreamWorks movie, they had to render the whole fucking thing out so Jeffrey Katzenberg could look at it, right, and see, and then give them notes, right? And then he'd go, well, I don't like it. You can keep the first 2 minutes, but I don't like this, right? And number one, so they spent all this time, rendering the movie out just so Jeffrey could say, start over. And I'm saying, where the fuck were you? You're the big producer on it. You're getting the big pay. Why don't you get a weekly screening? So before they go so far afield that you don't like it after 3 months and you got to render the damn thing, why don't you show up for your job and get a weekly screening and give them input as they go along before they go off track and earn your money? And so that's why a DreamWorks movie costs $150 million and a movie like 9 only costs $10 million, is because they're not wasting time appeasing the hubris of these big guys.
Well,
but the reason why is the movie makes $1 billion. So what if they spend $75 million appeasing Jeffrey with his little things of rendering it out? It's still going to make a ton of money. So let's just do it because we're still making it's a drop in the bucket to the billion. But what if the movie fails? They could have saved that. Elemental could have been break even if they didn't have this arduous process with people needing to be spoon fed. You could tell in the script stage some of the problems. Where were you at the script stage? You're dealing with people that just don't do the work is the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, when I've talked a lot about 30 plus years ago when I worked at Warner Brothers, my first job in the industry, every day after lunch, all the studio executives had to go watch dailies of all the movies that were in production at the time. And, if there were 5 big movies in production, you had various creative executives that were covering their films, and then you had the higher-up executives that were covering their films. My boss was Bill Young, who was the senior vice president of feature production, meaning he oversaw the physical production of all movies for Warner Brothers. So if there's a problem during production, our department had to deal with it. Do executives do that? I'm sure executives are sent links every day to watch dailies. How many of them do?
Yep.
I mean, back then, everybody was very hyper aware of what was going on a daily basis. There was a Dan Aykroyd movie called Nothing But Trouble. If people remember that. It was an amazing, during production, it was a complete nightmare. And if you see the movie, you can understand why. But I feel like you do, that the people, and also the people at the studios, they've never made movies before. The executives that are working at the executives go the opposite direction. They go from Ivy League business MBAs to working at the studios because that's what a corporation will do: hire an MBA out of a Ivy League school, and then they'll work in a movie studio for years, and they'll get a producing deal, and then leave the studio, and then become a movie producer. And sometimes with people like Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who actually started at Warner Brothers when I was working there, becomes a really good a good movie producer. But it's amazing that and we see that across the board now. We've been seeing it for years, and the amount you think.
You can see one of my problems as a filmmaker is I don't suffer fools gladly, and I think the people that are really good filmmakers they're good filmmakers. They got the skills, but they also have really good social skills, and they somehow are really. You have to be really good at navigating that stuff. And I have a feeling like I tried to be the guy that would be embracing of other people's ideas. I have this theory, just as you transmit pheromones when you're young to attract your mate or whatever, I think even though I said, man, that's a really great idea, I was sending out a pheromone that you're an idiot. And that they knew deep down that I wasn't sincere. I tried to be the guy that suffered fools gladly, but I think they could see through me. But there are people that I know from film school that actually their movies aren't that great, but they've had really great careers, and they were really great people. And so I think sometimes, I mean, a great skill to have, anybody out there that wants to be a filmmaker, is learn to be good with people and find a way to be more forgiving than me. My wife gets mad at me that I'm so, I'm such a perfectionist, or I get so mad, that I'm, it's like, it's like in the world, the A students end up working for the C students, and most of the producers and studio execs are C students compared to the filmmakers.
Well, but you need all of those skills. You need
all of them. I mean, the best thing would be to be somebody that is really a visionary and is a great writer, understands stories, the biggest thing to be a great director is time management. What can I get in my 50 days? I used to hate it in Variety where they would celebrate the director's got a 100-day schedule. This guy's a 100-day director. And I'm like, no, you should be celebrating the directors that can do it in 20 days.
Right.
Right? Because I could do anything. My mom could direct a good movie. If you have a good script and a good cast and a good DP, you can have the biggest idiot if they have enough time. Right? I mean, I kid you not, because script casting, right, is the most important thing. And the director on some movies, unless he's a visionary, I think the director is the concierge of the set. He's there to kind of facilitate, answer questions, glad hand people visiting the set. And yeah, I like that gun better than that. I wear that hat, not that hat. You're telling me that I had anything to do with Clive Owen's performance? He's so good. What am I going to do to really chisel and make him a great actor? He's a great actor. I'm the recipient of all of his ears, right? And the best thing I can do to adjust performance is write the script. That's the most important thing.
Well, yeah, and cast him in the first place. I mean, for those of you who haven't seen Shoot 'Em Up, I think it was a movie before its time. It was heavily influenced by John Woo's Hard Boiled, but it was an action film. Tell people, because I love hearing you say this, what did you want when you were writing Shoot 'Em Up? What was your impetus? What was it you wanted to convey with the movie? Because you were saying for me, the way I remember it, you were talking about gunfights and what you wanted to do with gunfights.
Yeah, well, I will have to admit, okay, that some of the things that you preach and I've preached, they're about story and theme and character arc are probably a little bit thin in the movie. There are some things I'll say it's not the strongest movie, but you know how you were talking when you saw The Matrix and there was another movie that you saw, The Endgame, where you go, oh my God.
Infinity War, yeah.
The movie moment, right? Well, I had that moment when I first saw a James Bond movie where I go, oh my God, this is just so much fun. It's escapism. It made me so happy to live in this world, right? And I love worlds where good triumphs over assholes, right? I mean, I have this great sense for justice, which is why I get so mad at people being stupid in filmmaking. And then I had it when I saw Star Wars. Oh my God, it was just like I was in a dream state. It was the most fun thing I'd ever experienced. Yep. And then The Matrix, right? And so I wanted to take a movie where those sequences, like the boulder and in Raiders, or the gunfight in the lobby of the Matrix where it's just cinema heaven. I wanted to create many sequences that you got that feeling. And the thing, again, you'll look at Dial of Destiny. How many times is somebody riding a motorbike or a small vehicle, right? I always feel like in an action movie, every action sequence should have its own theme and its own texture. And why is this one different? You can only have one out-and-out gunfight, but you can have a gunfight in a vehicle, right? Or you have, a scene against the sniper or whatever, or a skydiving gunfight, or a gunfight delivering a baby. But each one has to have its own texture. It's not another chase through Cairo or another chase through the woods after a train, right? The train part was good. Right? So I wanted to create a movie where the story was strong enough in between that you had a story drive, but you got to as many of the cool things that you can do in a gunfight. And most of these action sequences, they're almost all foreplay, and they don't have the climax shot, right?
The money shot.
Right, money shot, right? But you look how many gunfights it is. Gun muzzle flash, guy ducks, muzzle flash, guy, right? And there's nothing, and they fill it out with 2 minutes, and then maybe the guy does one clever thing to save the day, if he actually does anything. Well, what I wanted to do was minimize the stuff that is like the boring filler, the setup, and get to the thing that is so super clever, right? Clive Owen is out of bullets, and the guy's falling out of the airplane. He's out of bullets, and the guy's coming at him with the gun. What does he do? Well, he uses the guy that he's just killed. He pulls that guy's parachute, so it blinds the guy shooting at him. Well, that's a big moment. It's a great idea, right? Paul Giamatti is shooting at a baby on one of those carousels in a park. Well, and our hero's too far away to save the baby, and Giamatti's going to kill the baby. Well, our guy Clive Owen shoots the carousel to start spinning the baby, so it's hard for the Giamatti with his scope to get off a shot. Well, that's clever, right? You've never seen that before. I wanted to create action that I'd never seen before. So you go, oh my God, that's fucking cool. All right, a little bit of story. Oh, that's fucking cool. He's making love and he's shooting bad guys while he's still inside Monica Bellucci. That's awesome. And so I wanted to create this thing that was just a joy, a dim sum of all the fun things that I loved seeing in action movies. And it was just a joy, a action ballet that was super fun. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted you to say.
And and it's so funny is that lots of people loved it. There were a couple people that go, "Oh, it was so unrealistic," right? And I'm like, who wants to, they like Don Murphy wanted to bring in this guy who was a firearms expert. Like, I don't want to meet the guy because that guy is going to come in there is going to say, when you shoot, you have to do, support it because, shooting like this, you're never going to aim right and get somebody right. But it's so cool to have like comic book diving shots of people shooting, right? Why do I want a guy to tell me this? I'm not going to do this in the movie. It's a fantasy, right? And the thing is called Shoot 'em Up. You watch the trailer. It is unrealistic, but it's an escapist movie, right?
Yes.
I love escapism. I do have to say one of the reasons why Raiders works is I think movies that are action movies that take place in another time, where the past and the future, you have less of your own reality to judge it against, and they become more believable in some ways. And
yeah. I mean, no, and I yes, and I have to say, full disclosure, I did produce the special features on the Bluray for Shoot 'em Up, and I work with Dave.
I wish they were able to take you up to Toronto, but they were too cheap to bring you up there.
Yeah, that's all right.
No, I realized later is like you were friends with Bryan Singer, and you remember you had all of his friends would go up there, and I was like, why does he need all his friends up there? And I realized how freaking lonely I was. He needed his friends there because directing is really lonely because nobody wants. You're the boss, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the DP is your friend on set, but most of the time he's not your friend. I was incredibly lonely up there for the
I remember.
And if you had gone, right, or maybe I should just pay it out of my salary. Just having somebody to go to dinner with every night would have made it a lot more fun.
Well, that's kind of why. That's why I was in Australia for 10 months on Superman Returns.
You kept insane.
Yeah, and then also we shot 1,500 hours of. I'd love to. It's too bad that who knows what between Kevin Spacey and Brian, who knows if they'll re-release Superman Returns. But I'd love to go back into all my footage because the documentary we made on the movie only represents 3 hours, and we could do.
About the Lord of the Rings? You had even more footage.
Yeah, but I think that was. Each movie had 10 hours of documentary footage on it, so
right.
It's been well represented. So Alexander Wilson says, as a novice historian, when Indiana Jones went to that place toward the end of the movie, my jaw hit the floor because I thought that important event would never be portrayed in cinema.
Well, we've done some spoilers. I don't want to spoil it then, but I have to tell you, okay, in a movie, you want your heroes in the final conflict to be fighting against the guy that you have opposing values with, and all the conflict, all the story threads are the hero and the opponent, right? And that whole thing where they switched gears, and a lot of the problems they had was with a outside problem that wasn't set up in the movie, had nothing to do with the story, nothing to do with the theme. Well, maybe a little bit with the theme because you got to go there. But in terms of the conflict, none of it was. It was just thrown in there. And you also don't want to bifurcate your antagonist or your conflicts. You want it to be one guy or one team against another team or another guy going at it. You don't want this third party in there mucking up the works. It lacks clarity, right? And I think that they basically probably in the script, the Nazi guy, we talked about this, the Nazi guy says, I'm going to go back to 1939. We lost the war because Hitler was a pussy, right? I'm going to get rid of, I'm going to be run the Third Reich. I'm going to get rid of Hitler, right? And I think there must have been a draft where you have this dilemma. Indy's back here, and if to stop the bad guy, he has to kill the guy. But by killing the guy, he saves Hitler. And probably they thought, we can't do that. We can't have Indiana Jones saving Hitler's life. So if you're not going to do it, don't tease us with it, because now we're thinking, wow, what you talk about good ideas or science fiction exploring great ideas. Don't pose a good idea and then yank it away and throw us in something that's inconsequential. I like the idea that you talked about Archimedes. If this is going to be your ending, then Archimedes and all that stuff should be part of the whole thread, not just a historian that said, this is where I hit the dial and da-da-da-da-da. It shouldn't posit, right? You shouldn't have Nazis at the beginning, Nazis at the end of the second act, and Nazis not really being in the third act. And talk about Indy hardly does anything in the final fight with the bad guy.
Yeah, and that's a problem. I mean,
if we sat down to lunch, this is an Indiana Jones movie. What is the big moment in the Indiana Jones movie where he saves the day? That is like almost like you make the top 5 rules of action movies. The hero has to be the hero. He has to do something super heroic at the end of the movie. That's simple. Why couldn't you just solve that at lunch? James Mangold knows better. Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy knows better. Why are they such like these I would understand if it was sophisticated and things didn't work or whatever, but these are like a kid who's interested in film in junior high wouldn't make that mistake. I beg of you. I don't understand. I really don't understand. Make Indy do something awesome. That's what I paid my money for. And then if the movie sucked, but you had this, oh my God, the ending was so awesome, I would have forgotten everything. And the movie, I didn't hate the movie.
Well, that's what you got in the beginning.
Yeah, but again, I thought the set piece was great, but there's nothing really clever. Even at the end when the machine gun is shooting all the other Nazis, that happened by accident. It wasn't anything that Indy did. Indy has to do something clever. All the thing was he's ducked, he shoots, he ducks, he shoots. Maybe he does the whip, but there's nothing really clever. The scale and the scope is fun and exciting, and I love to see that. but people always mistake scope for clever action, and they're
I mean that's been a problem with big tentpole properties. They give you this cacophony of noise at the end, and if it doesn't matter,
Well,
I mean, look.
now you're getting. See, you're Mr. Positive, I'm Mr. Negative, but like, I don't understand why these guys don't pick up the phone and go, "Hey, why don't we hire Michael Davis for a couple of weeks and let him do a punch up and give us our ideas?"
Well, they should. I've been a fan of yours for 30 years, and I would hire you to look at any action movie and analyze that. You could be the action movie whisperer.
Right, yeah, that's a good thing. But let me ask you, why has it never happened ever? Why are they so stupid?
They're scared of you. Look at you on this show. Come on, Pete.
No, but I mean, even still, they hire me for 2 weeks. I'm not directing the movie. They can throw everything I did out. You know.
Look, I think the problem is that this is an industry where for an industry that you'd think is so results driven, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how much a movie made. That's it. That's all anybody cares. And now in the Wall Street,
they think that the director had the magic touch behind that, when in fact maybe it's the property, maybe it's the casting, maybe it is.
I think look. You still need, as you know, a director that can orchestrate. I mean, look, you look at somebody like, and I'm not holding him up as the greatest director in the world, but right now I think probably the most bankable director in the world is somebody like, aside from Tenet, Christopher Nolan. Even when he made Dunkirk, it still made $500 million, and Warner Brothers said basically, okay, you made so much money for us, go make your little World War II movie. They felt the same way about Inception. They're like, okay, we don't really know what this is. I mean, Warner Brothers marketing took all the credit for making Inception a success, because nobody got what that movie was supposed to be. Tenet I don't think it ever would have worked, even if there wasn't a pandemic. But the guy has made Oppenheimer, and it's relatively cheap compared to all of the other blockbusters that came out this summer. It's only only $100 million. But it doesn't have a whole lot of visual effects in it. He likes to do everything in camera, so you don't have 1,000 effects people around the world. But, I think what's happened is a lot of these directors, as you know, get hired for making an indie movie, or they make a video game, or they make one thing, and they get hired and they get put on a tentpole property, and they're completely ill-equipped to direct these films. They've never done anything. Even Colin Trevorrow made Safety Not Guaranteed, which is $1 million movie, and then he's directing Jurassic World because Spielberg liked Safety Not Guaranteed. But since then, he got kicked off of Duel of the Fates. He didn't get his movie that he made that wasn't Jurassic World didn't do very well, which had something to do with him getting kicked off of Duel of the Fates. So people aren't even allowed to build their own careers and learn their craft. I mean, how many?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I understand. I'm an outsider in this. Ultimately, I think that Chris Nolan's movies are beautifully crafted, but he enters universes that I'm not interested in going to. I don't really want to go to Dunkirk. I don't really want to go worry about the atomic bomb. And even in Inception, the most interesting thing was everything twisting, which is scope, but not cleverness. When they had the fight, when the world was turning around, all it was bang, 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 bang. And he could have given me a little bit more. Right?
I agree.
And I think it's hubris that he doesn't. It's like they go, if I make it fun, then it makes the movie less important. If I give them a popcorn movie or moment, then it undermines my seriousness. And I mean, it's just, his best movie was the one where, what was the guy with the tattoos? His indie movie he made with the Suzanne Todd, the one with Guy Pearce.
Memento.
That's his best movie. It's smart. It's got conscious thinking.
By the way,
after that, and I have to say this, okay, is he goes and makes Batman serious after we have Joel Schumacher, right? He makes a sober, not silly Batman. No, duh. Anybody hiring that would make it a sober Batman, and then it does well because the Batman everybody wanted to see, right? Have you ever seen his Batman movies? It's got the Batmobile. Here comes the Batmobile. Great cinematography. Batmobile jumps over a building. Batmobile. Skid. Batman gets out and confronts the Joker. What's cool about that? What is cool about that?
He flipped a semi-truck. That was cool.
Oh, no, seen in a billion other movies. What, you know, I mean, come on, you got the Batmobile. What can... I don't understand. They've seen all the movies where you see, like, this is the moment where people go, whoa, like, okay, Shoot 'em Up did not perform in theater, but when I went to see it in the theater and Clive Owen smashes his car into the van and he flies through his window that he shot out and he shot the van window so he could fly in and then shoot everybody. Everybody cheered. It's a movie moment.
Yeah,
I pay for that, and it is hubris on these people's parts that they don't do it, and they have the power and the money to do that. They have the best storyboard artists in the world giving them ideas, and they can't do anything. Like, I'm sorry.
No, this is the best.
That guy on there. So you have like the last Bond movie, right? They have these 4x4s going through the woods, right? And you know, Bond is driving, and how does Bond get rid of the first car? He goes like this, and he bumps him off the road. Next guy, he turns, bumps him off the side of the road. Third guy, bumps off the side of the road. How many TV movies have you seen in it? That is TV movie. You don't do that in a Bond movie. You got everything in the world, and you just do a TV movie car chase?
Well, to be fair...
Right?
I think that's why some of the John Wick franchise has, even though it's very repetitive after a while, I mean, come on, ninjas on motorcycles.
I actually didn't see the last one because it reminds me of the mid-range action movie that performed and mine didn't, you know, and it reminds me. I've seen all three. The thing that I would say about John Woo movies, they have many.
John Wick,
yeah.
John Woo's different, but I love John Woo too.
Okay. John Wick they have moments that are really clever, but they do too much foreplay, so they dilute the foreplay to cool thing ratio. If they even actually made the movie shorter or less foreplay, the cool things would stand out. The one thing that they do 100 times better in my movie is their photography is gorgeous. You've never seen a gunfight movies shot with such beautiful photography. But I do think the ratio between foreplay and muzzle flash is too high to the amount of coolness they have. They could make it better if they expanded the cool things and less of the foreplay.
Yeah, and there's too many. The gunplay actually gets repetitive because it's all the same.
That's right. And so why do it if it's repetitive?
Well, listen, I got some more questions, and I will. This is like one of my favorite streams I've done in forever. Thank you for this. Thank you for being you. Irene Jobson says, "You mean duct tape and Gorilla Glue won't fix this?" I just want to show you, Irene. I didn't know you were going to say that. Here's actually duct tape that's Gorilla Tape and Gorilla Glue. I always have both at arm's length to fix something.
But I do have to say that you make sure you have really good duct tape if you're in the silo. Have you seen all of Silo?
I've seen all of Silo.
I think it's pretty good science fiction because even I was on the edge of my seat, and it's not a science fantasy. It's a science fiction, and I binge watched it.
It's good. It's really good, and it had. I mean, I'd read the book, so I knew more. But
so you won't have the cinema experience. I didn't read the book.
But it's really good. Stephen Langford says, Rob, we need 4K physical releases of Schwarzenegger's End of Days, The Sixth Day, Immortals with Henry Cavill, a Troy director's cut with Brad Pitt, and The Time Machine, the original and the remake. Well, I don't know if we need the Guy Pearce one as much, but I'd love the original. Look, I want more 4K stuff of everything, so I totally agree with you. Oh, here's a good one, Michael. Maxim M says, Rob, how would you and Michael fix The Flash? How would you fix The Flash?
Well, you and I, the problem is that I actually really like The Flash. I love the byplay between the immature Flash getting his powers and the mature Flash not losing his powers. I would have to look at it again. I didn't think it was super amazing, but I really enjoyed it. So maybe
I did too. I enjoyed The Flash. I mean, I don't know. I saw it at CinemaCon, and it wasn't because I saw it early. I just found the movie wildly entertaining, and I think that's a lot of it was because of my comic book background. But I enjoyed it. I
think that when this whole conversation has been about multiverses, right? And they basically dealt with, yeah, he tried to go back in time a few times, but it's really about changing one timeline. So it was more simplistic, and it allowed you to have fun with it. I mean, the only thing that we talked about that would be fun is it would have been great to see a clip of Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz in it. That's how I would have made it better.
To have recreated it.
You're seeing that pieces of Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz. I would have loved that.
And the thing is, there's pieces that exist that they could have gone to Universal and maybe snag one. I don't know if...
They're probably dailies.
Yeah, there's daily. I mean, it would have been really...
But they just can't admit that the fact they probably had to clear the rights just to mention it. I don't know. I mean, I mean, maybe the fact of the matter is that the Zod conflict is with Superman. And so the antagonist is not really the main... It's a problem for the Flash, but Zod doesn't even know who the Barry Allen is, right? And so from a structural standpoint, it would be better if they didn't have to tie it in with another part of the universe, but they created another world-changing event that is more directed to Flash and his opponent. From a story standpoint, they could have. You don't have to go back and remind people of the Superman movies. I mean, it gives you a reason to have,
yeah, well, again, I think that like even the Michael Keaton Batman, in the context of the film, I understand how they introduced him, but you can't rely on an audience's understanding because not all of the audience has a connection to the Michael Keaton Batman. And if they had showed Batman doing something before we meet him, that you see some great action sequence that introduces Batman, and then we realize it's the Michael Keaton Batman, and the Flash thinks, it allows the audience to meet the Michael Keaton Batman.
Got to see the first Batman of his world, his normal world.
Yeah.
And then that this is not the same guy, or, yeah.
No, because when you meet him as a wild, grizzly man, the audience that doesn't have any connection to the Michael Keaton Batman doesn't, when he walks out and he is Batman, if you're not, if you're under 30, if you're a moviegoer under 30, you're like, why is he Batman?
Right.
And
it's also is like, again, it's always a comparison and contrast. You see Marty McFly's dad older as a loser. You see Marty McFly's dad as this energetic science fiction young guy, right? There should be like, hey, Wayne Manor is beautiful and Bruce Wayne's, everything's fine. There are no cobwebs, right? And there's some funny thing there. And then what happened to Wayne Manor? It's all fucked up. Where's Bruce? And then you get to see the compare and contrast. It's the same thing. It's seeing Lex Luthor being the hero after knowing what a shit he was.
Right, yeah.
It's the comparison that makes it fun. They probably, what would have made it better is you should look at Back to the Future and all this little setups and payoffs, because people love setups and payoffs, and maybe look at the original Groundhog Day and look at all the little setups and payoffs in the background, because they had things that, Bill Murray would walk across the street here, and then in the next scene, he'd walk the exact same shot, but there'd be a slightly different sign in the window, or the conversation between two people in the background was slightly different because of something that he had done. And those, in time travel movies, people love those little parallels, the same but different. And they could have and then the movie gets, the reason why Back to the Future is a hit in movies like that is people go see them multiple times. You need to give people things to discover and surprise. I know I missed half the little jokes in the movie because they were so good.
Yeah, and Back to the Future has a lot of that, like Mayor Goldie and all that stuff, how he's sweeping the floor and all that. So, yeah. Irene Jobson says, for those Dance Dance Revolution moves, let's go to Captain Jack. Yes. Culture War Diplomacy says, hey, Rob and friends, a small tip. Thank you. And Culture War Diplomacy became a member of the channel. For those people who are new members, we have a member chat on Saturday. They last hours, and they're lots of fun. Garfield's Bizarre Adventures became a member of the channel. Blunt Philly Reviews says, Rob, this is why you're the man. I love the insight you provide. Michael Davis, no fool should ever be suffered. A fool is a fool.
Thank you.
A fool is a fool.
I have to tell you, I mean, we talked about that. I'm working on a new project, a new animated project, and I don't really want to say too much, but I'm trying to get a bunch of YouTubers like Rob to help me crowdfund it. And Rob was the first one I went to. But I have literally gone on the internet to approach hundreds of YouTubers that talk about movies and pop culture. And I got a great team, but I do, and I'm biased maybe, but Rob is really, up there as one of the best,
Well, I would say, as I was telling you, like Chris Stuckman, I mean, I don't have nearly the audience that Stuckman has, but...
You never wrote me back. Chris, write me back. Come on, I'm awesome. I sent you 5 emails, Chris.
Well, to be fair, Michael, he's been working on his feature film that he's been directing.
Oh, okay.
So,
can I do another shout out? Just help. I wrote him 3 times. Is this guy? He's more of a gamer geek. It's Markiplier. I made an animation for you. Markiplier, email me. Look at my video because I got a part for you as an animated character.
And people are going to tell him. People are going to see that. But no,
Stuckman
did the same thing. Stuckman turned to crowdfunding, and he crowdfunded. He made over $1 million, and he's made.
Smart because he built it. Actually, half of it is probably from himself. He earned it because he's been a movie. He's been. Movies.
I'm a huge fan of Chris. I'm a huge Chris Stuckman fan. He does a fantastic job. I think he's a really good reviewer. I think he's fair. He's not vitriolic, and he really knows his films. And he wrote a book too. He wrote a book. I think the 50 movies.
I thought he had finished his movie.
He shot his movie. But he's been in post. He's in post, yeah. And they have to raise some more bucks for visual effects. It's very funny. He said that one of the things, like, he didn't realize how many effects that aren't necessarily, like, there's a car that drives by in one scene. He goes, I need to digitally erase the headlights. And I'm like, I love that he learned on the job, and and of course, that's not something he would have anticipated. So now he wants it to be perfect, as all filmmakers do. So he's going to go back and raise some more money. I don't know if he's already done that yet, but to do the effects to fix those kinds of things. So more power to him. And I'm a huge admirer of Chris Stuckman. And I love the fact that
the thing is there's got to be an After Effects tutorial that he could do it himself.
That's true. I mean, and maybe he eventually might. But you don't want.
Amazing what people do.
He'll do that on the next movie.
Okay.
Dan.
Anyway, I'm sorry, Chris. It's fine. I know you're too big. It'd be a dream come true if you were to come aboard this project. But I understand it. When I make movies, I'm so self-involved with my own thing. I'm amazed when filmmakers mentor younger filmmakers because it's so hard to get your own movie made. I don't know how these guys even have the energy or the passion to mentor somebody when there's so much just to get your own thing going.
Oh, I know.
I understand. I'm being facetious mostly. So.
No, Dan V900 says Dune's production budget was $165 million and looked incredible. District 9 cost $30 million and holds up with a lot of CG. Many studios and filmmakers don't know how to manage a budget and get the most out of it. Oh, I agree 100%. But remember, Neil Blomkamp did his own effects for his Joburg short that sold everybody on District 9. So, and he
probably had friends or he did it himself. And he also know what the price was. So he didn't get gouged by over expense. He went to the niche houses that were going to give him a good thing. I would recommend everybody go to the site called Wonder Dynamics. It's this Steven Spielberg's on the board of directors. I did a test of it. You can shoot any video of a live action person. You put in the video, and then one click, you drag a cursor, and it puts a rectangle around the actor you want to replace. You can import your own CGI character, but I just used one of their stock robots, drag the robot in, and it rendered it, and it took my motion and turned it into a robot. And even though the robot was thinner than me, the AI painted in the backgrounds where I no longer blocked out the background for the thin robot, and it is freaking amazing. It's like, it's 2 clicks and you got a robot like District 9 in it. Wonder Dynamics, I got in on the beta of it, but they're probably going to go commercial with it soon. It's the most amazing thing.
Well, Gareth Edwards, who directed Rogue One, he directed Monster and he directed Godzilla. He has a new movie coming out called Creator. And Gareth Edwards, again, did his own effects in his movie Monster, which is what got him noticed. But Creator looks like it has some really, really incredible effects work.
The thing about all these new effects is it makes it a lot easier to do it. But it's the same thing when these great video and film cameras came out. It still comes down to great scripts and also, unfortunately, casting marquee people. So you're going to see a lot of people being able to make great effects in their movies, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good movie because it ultimately comes down to story. And District 9 had an awesome story.
I agree.
Great.
This is interesting. Zachary Zabali says Gary Vaynerchuk, the famous entrepreneur, has a concept called kind candor. He's truthful in his critique of his employees, but he does it with kindness. I like that.
Well, he's big in the NFT world now, right?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
He's also launched an NFT line that he ended up selling a bunch of the plushie toys to like Toys R Us. He also has his GaryCon, where everybody comes to talk about entrepreneurialism, and he's pretty cool about that. He also, if you buy a certain number or if you get the right NFT, you get to have dinner with him. And he's real. It's a crowded world, the NFT world. I've tried a little bit of that with a friend of mine, but Gary was one of the guys that sort of streamlined that and has had success and is sort of he's pivoted his career in many different ways, and I give him a lot of credit for
cool.
all the different things he's done.
You'll like this question. Our friend Glenn Mark, who works on the channel, what does Scott Mance mean when he says that Mission Impossible 2 has a bit too much John Woo in it? All the slow motion or gunplay or both?
You know what? I can't. They blend together to me. So.
Well, I think no. A lot of people think Mission Impossible 2 is the worst because it is very John Woo. But I think it's a combination of both. I mean, John Woo. Like, I'm a huge John Woo fan. Whether it's The Killer, whether it's A Better Tomorrow, whether especially Hard Boiled. We both love love for Hard Boiled. The Red Cliff movies, God of Gamblers. I'm just a huge John Woo fan, but. He combines melodrama with action, and when
the dubs and stuff like that.
and even his imagery gets melodramatic. The slow motion, people don't just get out of cars; they step out of cars and their leather jackets flow behind them as if they're royalty or something. And a lot of people don't dig that.
I'm a bad. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I got to work on that, but I get so excited, but. Some of it is context because for what we see as melodrama in the Chinese market, that might be standard and not seen as so stylistic and melodramatic.
No,
part of it is us misreading the original intent.
You're 100% right, and Wu always had that when he came to America and he made Hard Boiled. Famously, Universal cut all of that stuff out, and there was a bootleg of Wu's version of Hard Boiled that went around that I believe that tape was actually put on the Hard Boiled release, the physical media release in France. But I remember having that bootleg tape, and they cut all the John Woo-isms out of John, and it's also the way it's edited.
They don't like people with a signature. I was told that one of the reasons I didn't get the Red movie is that they thought that I would make it a Michael Davis movie, and they wanted to make it a Red movie, and they don't want the stamp, the voice of somebody on the outside.
No, which is, and they did that, and the same thing happened to John Woo. I heard he was locked out of the edit bay in Broken Arrow. Here they poached this great director from Hong Kong, but again, it's because the people making these decisions, they're like, "Ooh, he's the next hottest thing," but they don't know why. And when he does,
they give them what they do well, they don't understand it. I do have to say, we submitted the script to shoot him up to John Woo's company, and they said it was too violent for him.
But I think that's it. Dan V900 says, if you're going to pump out movies with $200 to $300 million budgets, make them around 2.5 hours or longer, results in less screenings, so your marketing better be on point. That is a major issue. Definitely so. I think so.
I think that, well, I think that I would have less superhero fatigue because I have to say every one of these superhero movies gives me more than the eye candy that I want. And you know how when you have too much candy in real life, you kind of feel sick? You had too many candy bars, too many lollipops? I actually think if they were short and brief and flew like lightning, they would cost less and they'd be more fun because you had less foreplay and you had more of the meat of it, and you'd get more screenings, so they'd cost less and they would make more money, and they actually would be bigger movies.
Yep.
I mean, they would be better movies. But
yeah. Tom Jr. Jackson asks if I met Eva St. Not only did I meet Eva St., I hung out with her for weeks. She was delightful on the set of Superman Returns. She was so much fun to work with. She was a lot of the stuff she did with James Karen was cut out of the movie. It's in the special features. I wish they didn't cut it out because it was great. She was absolutely amazing. And to hang out with Eva St. was one of the highlights of my life in terms of meeting somebody. I mean, God, she worked with Hitchcock. She's amazing. Alexander Wilson says, Michael, is the Fast and Furious franchise cooled in your mind?
the thing I do like about it, in some ways, it's what I love about why I made Shoot 'em Up is all the cool things you can do with a gunfight, and it's all escapist and not realistic. I do think that they have done a lot of cool things with being very specific. I think it's one of these things where if you had a greater separation between each movie, you'd have a greater hunger for it. But because Universal doesn't have another tentpole, they have to make more Fast and Furiouses more frequently. I think they'd be better off having a couple more franchises that they could count on so they could stagger all of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I also think part of the problem with, I love the Fast and Furious franchise. I thought the best was Fast 5. That's my favorite. But the problem is the latter since 8, well, actually since 7, but 8, 9, and I hated Fast 9. And Fast X was ridiculous because the problem is their reason for being, which was car chases. We've all been in cars. We know what it's like to drive fast in cars if you're going through the city streets. And once they started doing computer-assisted mayhem with all their car stuff, it ceased to be interesting from an action perspective because it had no reality anymore.
Yeah, and I do think that there is a lot to be said about that. That's why that car chase in the second Bourne movie is so great. Because
car chases, the more you put CG in car chases, the less they work.
Right, because you want to be able to believe it. And the thing about superhero movies is because the whole world is like, was that a CGI background or a real background? Is that a CGI cape or a real cape? There's kind of a look that is consistent throughout, so that palette you begin to accept. But if you are doing a movie and they're in, Rio de Janeiro and it's all these great locations, and then you see a chase and it's a fake Rio de Janeiro, it doesn't. You call it the verisimilitude all the time. Right? It doesn't, and there's a subliminal thing about.
And I think part of the reason that people didn't respond to The Flash is there's way too much artificiality in it. Like the whole action sequence with Batman, there's no insert shots to Ben Affleck's face. Like even in the Bond movies when they had in the days of rear projection, I just watched the other day, I wanted to make a comment on Twitter and say that they wrote an article about Captain Kirk and Spock hooking up. They're like, how come Kirk and Spock haven't hooked up? And I wanted to make a comment to the Mary Sue and write back on Twitter. That's because all of you over there at the Mary Sue need to have a real man. And I figured if I tweeted that, I'd get canceled. So instead, I tweeted out the clip from The Living Daylights, which ends with Bond parachuting onto the boat. And the woman's going, all around me are playboys and tennis pros. I really need a real man. And Bond flips over and she'll need to call you back. So I tweeted that instead. I'm sure nobody got it. But in that sequence, when Bond is he's on top of the truck, and the truck gunfire ignites the TNT that's in the back of the truck, and they constantly are cutting to insert shots of Timothy Dalton on a fake. It's a projected background because
I
it's
have
Bond.
to tell you, the hardest thing is that I had very limited when they do parachute shots, whether it's Pierce Brosnan parachuting into North Korea or whatever, or Roger Moore landing in, with the man with the golden gun or Live and Let Die. They always look really weak and cheap, and so I made sure I didn't have Clive Owen do it because I've never seen them pull off a parachuting shot.
No, it's tough, and when you see that, it looks bad. But you've got to have some kind of, like in that flash sequence, you're watching digital doubles the entire time, and
Right.
it's like a great action sequence. You constantly have to reestablish geography if you want it to work. And I think one of Michael Bay.
You gotta watch it. That does that really well.
Oh yeah, I mean all the great action directors know how to do that. Michael Bay doesn't know how to do that because he shoots a bunch of coverage and then cuts it later. So you watch the end battle in the first Transformers, it's incomprehensible because you don't know where anything is. Great action scenes rely on geography to understand your action. If you don't establish the geography, the action becomes meaningless. I mean, I'll tell you something. One of the most did you watch The Gray Man, the Russo brothers movie, The Gray Man?
Well, yeah, I think I finished it. Yeah, I did.
So there's a scene in The Gray Man where there's this fight on an airplane as the airplane is going down. It is very competently made, but it is so not exciting. It's a beautifully shot, perfectly serviceable action sequence, but you're just watching action. You never have a sense that every action sequence has to be like a movie unto itself. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it has to be designed at the end of the first act and the second act, you up the stakes. And then by the end of the second act of the action sequence, the hero is on the ropes. And then the third part is the climax where the hero turns the tables and defeats the villain. You have to think of each action sequence as a story that's being told. Well, when I was watching, other than the fact that this plane is going down, this action sequence inside the plane was not exciting at all. Because it's like, okay, well, what is the objective? They're fighting in the plane's going down.
What's new? What is new? We've seen fights in planes, right?
Yeah, you want to see something new. It's new, but you also need to know, where am I supposed to go? Are you trying to get off the plane because you want you to parachute out? Like what? And so when you're watching the sequence, it's a very competently shot and acted, and the action's fine. But I felt nothing watching it because I didn't know, tell me what I'm supposed to feel. A great action scene is the truck chase in Raiders of the Lost Ark. When Indy chases after the truck, the Ark is on the truck. You know that where Indiana Jones has to go, and he keeps trying. He gets into the cab. He gets shot in the arm. He gets thrown off. He goes underneath the truck and the bullwhip and all that. It always, and each time, it creates another obstacle that Indiana Jones has to surmount. And you know exactly.
The fun is the surprise is how he succeeds.
Yeah, and that's
But
Coach.
you reminded me, and the thing about you're talking about the Fast and the Furious, and when you're doing visual effects, and a lot of these superhero movies have problems because they're not doing the real photography. I did have to say, even though it was very, very visual effects oriented, the opening action sequence in The Flash.
Oh, it's great.
Falling, it doesn't matter whether the effects were good. I thought they were fine enough. It obviously still felt like visual effects, but it was such a good idea.
Yeah.
And if you have a good idea, it can overcome anything. And that was like a Flash situation that you would never. Well, how's he going to do all this? There's just too many babies, and and he needs to eat something because he's running out of energy, right? And that's where the idea is supreme. And in some ways, if they had an ending of the movie and he had this clever ending, they always put the clever stuff at the front, and the ending never has the cool super.
Well,
idea.
that was the thing. They set up an expectation that the climax of the movie would have been like that times 10. Like
right, all action movies, 95% of the action movies, it's like the James Bond effect. The opening sequence is the best in the movie, and every action movie is like that. They want to suck the audience in, put them in a good place, but they never save their best stuff for the end.
Yeah, no, it's a bummer. Coach sipping Jamba Juice out of a straw asks, how would you and Michael make a better Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie than the great and iconic 1990 film. All other Teenage Mutant Ninja films do not exist and don't matter.
Well, I worked on the second Ninja Turtles movie.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I was the storyboard artist. And they kept telling me I was doing all these funny action scenes, and the producer from Golden Harvest kept saying it was too violent. And I'm like, it's not. It's just like slapstick comedy stuff. I would have to go back. I think the fact that at the time the Ninja Turtles animatronics was near state of the art, and it wasn't done by a big studio, and there were kind of rough edges, but sometimes movies that aren't perfect and have rough edges have this charm because the soul of the filmmakers and the love of the filmmakers are in the movie. And that's why I talk about this movie, Sisu. There's more soul in it. It's hard to have soul when you got $200 million. And so I'm interested in seeing the Seth Rogen one. I do like the visual style of it.
I do too.
I think that Seth Rogen has a great. I just finished listening to his book Yearbook, and the thing I was impressed about is that Seth Rogen has been preparing for a life in entertainment since he was 12. He was doing stand-up when he was 12 years old. He was going into clubs with all these adults. He's been working he did his 10,000 hours way early, and that he also. I know I'm off track now, but his first humor, he was writing about, his reaction to his Jewish grandparents. And so everything was so genuine, and that it's funny because it's true.
Right.
And so I'm hoping maybe in the Ninja Turtles, he's getting a little bit of what it's like to be a teenager is true. So maybe that will be better. But usually I tell you, the first one is the best. Ninja Turtles, first one is the best. Best Back to the Future, the first one. Best Matrix, right? The only time that has ever been different is Goldfinger is the best Bond movie, and it took them 3 tries because they were still figuring it out.
Road Warrior is better than Mad Max.
That's true too.
So I just because
and the second Bourne movie, the Bourne Supremacy, I like better than the Bourne Identity, just because the car chase is so awesome.
And the Bourne Ultimatum, though, at the end, the third one's not the fourth, but the third one's incredible too. Anthony Peterson says we need a brand new original science fiction movie franchise, but is that even possible these days? Well, I'd say Dune. Dune. I'm a huge Dune fan.
What's this one that's coming from 20th Century Fox with the girl and What's Heaven? This trailer that it's not from any brand thing. It's
the creator.
That's new, right?
That's Gareth Edwards. That's new. We've also got Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's new franchise that's coming. That's new. They're going to do a universe. So, I think it's possible. I do think it's possible.
I think that the trick of it is it has to be a sleeper, and it has to start at a smaller scale. And then they go, oh, everybody went to see this. Now we'll do the next one, and we'll give it more money. It's kind of not the same thing, but you look at the Mad Max movie. There's no comparison between the two. But the fact the first, Mad Max did well enough, they made the version that he wanted to do with the Road Warrior. But you can't start out big. You have to start out with a good idea that's scaled, and then you can scale up into an expanding franchise.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I have to say, and we put so much blame on the studios, and I don't blame your audience, but in general, most movie audiences are lemmings. They if there's a great indie movie, but they don't recognize the star, I don't know who's in it. I'm not going to go see it. Oh, it's got so-and-so in it. I'm going to go see it. And so the audience out there is not as educated, and therefore it makes it harder for other movies to get traction because the studio goes, well, they need to see the star, that it's a real movie when it's a star in it. They don't necessarily go because I love that story or I love that idea. It's that idea, but with that star and that sheen and with that from the directors of. And part of the problem is that the consumer, it doesn't help the situation.
Well, and also when we were growing up, I was going to see B movies, whether it was at the drive-in or whether it was at the multiplex. I would go see Roger Corman movies. You could see Battle Beyond the Stars in a theater. I would go see like Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, even though it was retitled Seven Doors of Death and edited. You know, people were going to see not young people, meaning me, like teenagers, and I was going to see blood and guts movies. I was going to see slasher movies. I was going to see exploitation films, whether it was like James Glickenhaus action movies like The Exterminator and The Soldier. There is no market for anything like that anymore. So there was a lot of the time that I would go see art house movies, or I'd go see exploitation cinema, and that's where, like, you know, that I went and saw Terminator because it looked, even though Schwarzenegger was in it, it was post Conan the Barbarian. It came out the same year as Conan the Destroyer in 84. I didn't expect the Terminator to be it was by a director I'd never heard of. I hadn't seen Piranha 2, and he got fired off that anyway. But when I saw Terminator, it blew me away.
Yeah, I went to see it as a goof. I was at USC Cinema, and they had this crappy theater across the street.
Yep.
And it was a Tuesday night, and I had nothing to do, and I had no expectations. And it was freaking awesome. And the fact that I had Schwarzenegger, and it was a deterrent, not a plus at the time.
Now, speaking of that, Secular Monk says, "Greetings, great interview with Michael. How would you fix the Terminator franchise? In my mind, the story ends after T2. I think you're exactly right. T2 is the end of the franchise. They keep trying to redo it, and the only thing they can do is you have another Terminator battling people, and there's nothing. Who cares?"
Well, you know, this is. Can I apply another movie franchise?
No, please go ahead.
Go back to this. Okay, you look at the three J.J. Abrams Star Wars. Okay, and the one thing that
the middle one's Rian Johnson.
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
The three, okay, not the side stories, okay. The thing that they don't understand about Star Wars is in every Star Wars movie, George Lucas introduced something new. You have the Death Star in the first one. Okay, the next movie, we're on a snow planet. We got a swamp planet, and then we go to the gas planet, right? And he introduces Yoda and the walkers, the AT-ATs, right? That's new, right? Now, granted, they were a big mistake. He should have gone with making it a Wookiee planet, not a
Ewoks.
The Ewoks, right? But it was a forest planet, right? And he was every movie, and he introduced the bounty hunter. He introduced Jabba the Hutt. He introduced the Rancor. There were all these visual candy things that he was doing something new. He wasn't staying with all the old toys in the toy box. He's adding new toys to the toy box. Even I love the design of the space speeders at the beginning of Empire, the snow speeders, how compact they were. The design, I love the way they look better than the X-Wing and the TIE fighters, right? And then, so my thing is, and I think George even said this in one of the interviews, is that he was always trying to, introduce something new in each one of the movies. Now, when you look at all the movies, they basically are just taking all the toys that George had and using them again. They did not go with, how do we make the first one have new stuff that we've never seen before, and then the next one has new stuff. Yeah, maybe they had one weird snook alien, which I wish that they had kept, right? But they bring back the Emperor. They didn't understand Star Wars is about the new. Here's the new cool thing. Here's the new visual. Here's the new vehicle. Here's the new monster, right? They're too afraid of the Jar Jar Binks effect that they are afraid to introduce anything new to be criticized. And it drives me nuts. And the thing, I thought there was a great book on the making of the first Star Wars, and some guy had come up, and we have the X-Wing fighters, we have the Y-Wing fighters. This guy went to JJ and says, here's a B-Wing fighter, a C. He did every letter of the alphabet as a fighter, right? And JJ could have picked the W fighter or the O fighter, right? What does he do? X-Wing type fighters and Y-Wings. They have all the other letters of the alphabet. And does he pick anything new? No. So I think the only way to make the Terminator new is that you need to create a new mythology. And the thing you need to do is killer robots, sentient robots, but you almost need to figure out what would we do if we were starting something new and not just rely on the old retreads. And that's why I like episodes 4, 5, and 6, is because George said, look, I'm going to let my imagination flourish. most of these things that they do the sequels, there is a lack of imagination, and they don't let people go because they're afraid that, oh, that doesn't really fit. I mean, I'm a Crystal Skull apologist. I have one big problem with Crystal Skull, but everybody goes, what do the Russians and the Cold War have to do with, Indiana Jones? Well, they were, if he's in 1950s, those were the bad guys. The Nazis were in the 40s. Who is he going to fight in the 50s? It's going to be the Russians, right? And they go, what does UFOs have to do? Well, when I was growing back, they had the Chariots of the Gods, the big paperback.
Well, that's something. It's so interesting that Eric von Donigen's book Chariots of the Gods was released in 1968, and I was surprised that, like, you've got an astronaut presence in Dial of Destiny, and it's Harrison Ford. I would have thought Harrison Ford would have been really excited about astronauts, and he would have said, I've met an alien.
That's
right. Or play off that joke. But I think you're right. Look, for the J.J. Abrams movies, I on one hand, with Star Trek, he changed everything. He went and just, let's redesign the Enterprise, and you made it worse. But with Star Wars, he kept everything. I'll change the dish on the Millennium Falcon. It's 30 years later, and they're still flying X-Wing fighters. They just changed the color, and like you said, here's an opportunity. If I was making a new Star Wars movie, the first thing I would do is use my incredible development staff at ILM, and having grown up with all the Art of Star Wars books, yes, I want to see a whole new design lineage of these things. And even in Star Wars, what do they give us? They give us another planetary. Instead of the Death Star, you now have a planet that has...
They were too afraid to do anything new. The other thing I have to say is one of the reasons Star Wars works is the costume design of Darth Vader. He looks fucking scary, right? What do they do with Adam Driver's outfit? It's like this nozzle thing. It's almost funny looking, right?
Yeah.
So why are we supposed to be afraid of him like he's the next Darth Vader when the costume design sucks?
Well,
it's not scary.
It's funny. He looks like that alien spy in A New Hope in the first Star Wars. Who's like, who's talking.
No, he looks like the guys
reporting where Docking Bay 97 is. Who's walking down the back?
The lame-o droids, the ones with the long heads that aren't even good fighters.
Yeah, but there's the snout. There's the snout alien that I always thought that Kylo Ren. I mean, Look.
But again, I don't understand why. That's a taste thing, and it's not like he's got the best artists in the world. The people that work on the Star Wars movies, they're just geniuses. They're just, and you can pick things, and I'm sure they pick ideas like. Okay, so I have this thing, that I thought was real, that I was watching the first J.J. Abrams, and this is how I think, okay? And I'm like, how come he has all these great storyboard artists to be clever? He doesn't do this. Do you remember when they were trying to escape in the TIE Fighter, and the TIE Fighter's got the little cord on it?
Yeah.
Right? And we've already set up that Kylo Ren can stop a blaster in midair, right? So why don't they trick Kylo Ren? They shoot a blaster at him, and he stops it in midair, so the blaster beam is hanging in midair, and then they drop the TIE Fighter to slash the wire using his, right? I thought of this 10 seconds after the scene happened. How can I do that in 10 seconds when the movie's playing, and they have 4 years, and they don't do something clever with the best army of artists? It's hubris. It drives me nuts.
Dude, don't get me started on, I could talk about J.J. Abrams' Star Wars and Star Trek movies forever. And how look.
You know what they call him? I was doing some research, and I'm sorry, J.J., but you got a lot of talent, right? But
he's got tons of money. He's okay.
Jar Jar Abrams.
Yeah, well,
that, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the YouTubers to do that. I just think the man's made 5 science fiction movies that I've hated. That are bad copies of Super 8 is a bad copy of Spielberg, where even the lens flares on the anamorphic glass that they shot it with are wrong. He wants lens flares, but they're the wrong lens flares. They're not Jan de Bont Die Hard lens flares, which is what or John Carpenter lens flares, Dean Cundy lens flares. That's what you're looking for.
You know what I suspect? You can go to these special effects, After Effects libraries and buy lens flares.
Yeah.
That aren't going to. I bet half of them were these overlays.
Oh, of course they were. But what you should really do is shoot with those fucking anamorphic lenses. So you get those. That's what I cannot stand. That's another thing. I mean, I know there's a shallow depth of field with anamorphic lenses. It takes longer to light. I get it.
Rob, I'm having such a bad effect on you. You're Mr. Positive, and here I'm telling all my toxic stories, and I've dragged you down from your positivity. Why can't we go back to what the person says? I love the movies. I love the going to the theater and whatever, and all this stuff is afterwards is because we love it. But it's also harder when you go, I've made movies and I know what it takes to go to the next level, and it's the level of frustration that makes us mad. I sometimes wish I went back to when I was in 6th grade before I ever thought about making movies, and I was just I just saw it as a regular person, not invested, didn't know the fact that filmmaker's a dickhead. I wish I had that basically childlike or unaffected, I'm just going there to be entertained. That's a great feeling, and I think it's a great sacrifice, because when you take your love and turn it into your work, you are sacrificing some of that stuff.
I agree. But you and I are still able to go watch movies and love them, when they're good. Yeah. I think
what's too bad. I made you more negative than you usually are.
No. I've been negative about Star Trek and Star Wars and J.J. Abrams, but I would say this. We live in a time where the entertainments that are getting made, especially at the studio level, have never been the subject of the kind of corporate politics and Wall Street needs that they are now. And we're getting a lot less diverse stories being told. We're not seeing emerging filmmakers that are really dynamic and making interesting things. And unfortunately, and as Lucas and Spielberg themselves predicted, what's happening at Disney and what's happened at Warner Brothers, Disney and Warner Brothers are suffering. I don't know if David Zaslav wants to part out Warner Brothers and sell it off like Gordon Gekko, wreck that entire 100-year-old institution. I hope not. But the problem is, at the end of the day, if all anybody cares about is making more and more profit and more money, the question has to be asked, well, what is life about? Like, what is human life about? So you've made a lot of profit, so at the end of the day, a bunch of people can what? Buy really nice clothes and buy bigger houses and go play golf in the Hamptons, and what is it you want? And I keep going back to Yuval Harari's book, the two books, Sapiens and Homo Deus. Yuval Harari is a Israeli historian that I talk about a lot, and he wrote these two books. One of them is Sapiens, which is like the 100,000-year history of humanity, and then he follows it up with a book called Homo Deus that's about man as God, basically, about what we're going to do moving forward. But he asks the question, who do we want to be as human beings, as the one race of people on this planet? Who do we want to be as people? And I think that we're entering an era, or we're already in the era, where people are trying to figure that out. And ultimately, getting rich and having these corporations that are going to lead us down into totalitarianism or authoritarianism is never going to work, because at the end of the day, there's only so much, even in streaming services, there's only so many households on the planet that can subscribe to your streaming service. So you can't have infinite growth. And that's true of any business on this planet.
Right. Well, you did remind me. I mean, I'm a big, I fought depression a lot over my life and done a lot of research on, how you feel good. And there's a lot of things, our belief systems, they talk about burning neural pathways. And if I'm always saying, oh, fuck this, fuck that, or I'm upset about that, or that makes me angry, I'm burning a neural pathway that makes it more likely that I'm going to get pissed off at that kind of thing. But if you're also, I think probably somewhere in your life, you were burning this positive, joyous neural pathways, because that's what you burn in. It's like habit. Right. It's like muscle memory. And I think about, in our country, right, they talk about the American dream. And they basically say it's to grow up in a happy suburbia, right? You grow up, you find the love of your life, you go to college, you get a job, you buy a house, you get a car, you have kids, and then you have a nice retirement and you have some vacations. That's sort of like the American dream, right? And because that's taught to us, whether you're watching a sitcom or people are talking about it or in commercials or whatever, that's the American dream. But they never, in the American dream, say, what are you contributing to make your world, even your small world or even your family, what are you doing to make the world a little bit better than if you weren't here? They never talk about what you're just saying. Who do we want to be? How do we make ourselves better? Right? And I think that if that was burned into the neural pathways, as the American dream is about how do I become a good person? How do I contribute? Right? And like, I know this is silly, and if somebody steals this idea or wants to do it, it's fine. I keep saying when I get tired of making movies, I'm too selfish. I like making movies, but what I want to do is create this thing called the owner's manual of the brain, right? And it's a very simple thing, and maybe 50 ideas about things about the brain that we need to know, and what we need to start doing early, so we know what the potential is. And or even just saying, start an early age of telling people, we want you to have all these great things in the American way, but American dream, but what are you going to do to maybe help the world be just a little bit better? And it's like, okay, if you decide, hey, I'm going to make this thing about positive things about pop culture. I know there's a lot of negativity out there, but I want to push positivity. I want to put a message of positivity out there. That's a great thing. That's going beyond the American dream, right? Or let's say you're Bob Zemeckis. I want to make the greatest American movie that makes people happy and go into the theaters and be happy. That's fine. Or if I wanted to work at Habitats for Humanity and I only can do it 1 year in my life, but I'm going to do it every weekend for a year, that's still a contribution better. But most people are like, hey, I got some free time. I'm going to take that extra vacation. Nobody ever thinks about how do I move us forward. Right?
But I do think a lot of people, though, they're looking, and we see it now, all of the performance politicization of our, like people go on TikTok and they're making their identity politics videos. And I do believe that people think by doing that, they're trying to make the world a better place. Even though I would dare say that it's really narcissism. You're trying to put out into the world how, look at how self-aware I am by rather than like going out and trying to protect everyone else. You need to do something that comes from you, that's genuinely from you, that you're going to affect some kind of real change. Don't expect something to come back. You should never do anything where you expect something to come back to you. If you're going to be totally altruistic and do something that you really believe will affect change, you have to take satisfaction in the act of doing it yourself. If you expect that you're going to get affirmation from someone else, that's not what you should be doing to make yourself feel better. And
I do agree. I do that. I also do think there's a biological clock, because I do think the older I get, with the film business, I no longer feel the need. Well, you see, I get mad, but I'm getting better at not feeling like people need to know I'm talented or that I'm creative and I did all this stuff. I'm more excited about how can I help my kids, right? I don't need to be a superstar. I don't need to earn a lot of money. I can just sit in my garage and make stuff, right? But the thing that you're talking about, putting out on Twitter, I've said some things on here that I believe in, but I also am cautious because I am questioning myself. Is what I'm saying bullshit, or is it about ego, or am I just spouting things because I want to be heard? Listen to me, I'm right, I'm pointing fingers. And the reason I haven't done it yet is because I'm afraid, or I want to learn more about finding the right way. If it is a good message, what is the best way of doing that? I don't know what it is yet, and I don't want to be a douchebag. And maybe I've been a douchebag a little bit here by proselytizing or saying some of these things. But I don't want to be one of those people, but I know that I'm capable of being that,
Well, no, and I think that is, everyone has. I believe that everybody has to find, like, all of these flights of fancy. Like, for me, if I'm not building a model spaceship or watching a movie or reading a book, there's something else I want to be doing. I have a million things that I spent 6 hours watching this reporter talk about what he knows about UAPs, the whole UFO, what's going on right now, and the people he's interviewed. He's an Australian reporter. And I watched this 6-hour video, this interview with him, which was absolutely fascinating. And I realized...
Are they UFO theorists or UFO realists?
Yes, he's not a conspiracy theorist. He's an actual reputable reporter. I think his name's Ross Cuthbert. Cuthbert.
Okay.
And he was the one that interviewed the whistleblower, and there's a lot of stuff coming out, and it's very interesting. I have a channel member who's a high-ranking Air Force intelligence officer, and he was the first person. He goes, "Here, watch this," and he's been sending me these things, and I'm like, "What are you trying to tell me? Like, what's going on here?" And what I find so interesting is, I'm watching this interview, right? And at one point, he's talking about that there are instances that have been reported from India to Russia to the United States to other nuclear powers, where apparently these UAPs, there's a lot of activity around our nuclear facilities, are able to turn off our nuclear weapons facilities, like literally turn them off from a distance. And I'm like, that's shocking. And they don't know how and why this is occurring, but clearly, like, this has not been reported, and I can understand why nobody would want this.
I actually think that's good, because maybe these people have evolved, and they're going to stop us from hurting ourselves.
Well, yeah, that could be. I mean, I think that's something I'd like to believe, but who knows what's out there? I mean, there's so much, and I'm a skeptic. I'm like Neil deGrasse Tyson when it comes to these things. There's all these different reporting from very reputable agencies, and I do believe, like, I've been watching Bob Lazar talk on Joe Rogan about alien technologies, and he's very, like, listening to him talk, I'm totally convinced about Bob Lazar believing in what he's saying.
I had a guy come and pitch me wanting to collaborate writing a Bob Lazar script, and he was talking about time, and time isn't linear, and I was like, we ended up not doing it, but I really liked it. I came in when I pitched, and they said, well, time is not like linear, and then I took a piece of pizza, and I folded it on itself. Time is more like this piece of pizza.
Yeah,
so
well, it was
Bob Lazar story.
Well, I'm listening to Bob Lazar talk, and he's like, look, I don't know where this came from. I know it was archaeologically based, like they dug something up, and that to me is plausible. Listening to all these people talk, it's plausible. But, who knows? But I'm like Fox Mulder. I want to believe. Because wouldn't it be...
the thing about it is that if they have the technology, and if they've been here, and if they were malevolent, they already would have done something already, right?
Yeah, like why? Yeah, I mean, and also...
and they probably are more like Star Trek, where when they come to a society that has no technology, they don't interfere. It's against the rules of the Federation to interfere, right?
Well, yeah,
right?
but I mean, yeah, sure, that non-interfere.
I learned that on the new Star Trek shows, but they really suck. So maybe that theory is wrong for me to think that. But I thought that they would do that in the old Star Trek shows. But they are.
No, that is yes,
I can believe.
That's the prime directive. But think about it this way: like, if I stumble across an anthill, ants don't even know I exist, but I can look down on an anthill. They have no conception of what ants have no idea that I come home to a house and I have people that I love, that I live with, that I have a collection of physical media. They know nothing. They can't even, in their lives, there's nothing in their brains that could ever allow ants to conceive of the life that I lead, and yet we share perhaps a yard. Mm-hmm. And I live in an ecosystem. There's a lot of trees around us. There's all kinds of things that live here: squirrels and owls and rats and ants and all kinds of bugs. And we live in none of them have any awareness at all of anything that goes on in my life. Like, oh my God, I'm stressed to pay my mortgage. These creatures that I live amongst, have no conception of this. So the idea that we would believe that we would have any conception of, we might be watched all the time.
So like we're the ants.
Yeah. Or we're whatever other.
I could buy that, but I do think that a lot of times when you're having a discussion, every example isn't absolute. That maybe there's.
But what
I gotta believe that squirrels know that we exist.
Well, squirrels know, sure, but they don't know about a mortgage payment or credit card bills or going to school,
I think dogs can sense the.
because we
gotta deal with the level. I think.
I'm saying though, I think the ants are more appropriate in the sense that we don't really interact with ants, and I think that whatever we're seeing, if this is in fact some kind of a incursion by an intelligent species of some kind, all we're getting is the very edge of something that we have no bigger understanding of, because we've already anthropomorphized aliens in our, like, every alien's it's either an alien like a xenomorph that's a creature that's going to kill us, which is essentially a wild animal, or it's somebody like E.T. that's, even though they're more advanced than us, E.T.'s kind of like a dog. Even though E.T.
couldn't make a spaceship.
No, I know, but in terms of in the movie, once E.T. is separated from his people, it's not like E.T. is sitting down and teaching us quadratic equations or how to channel through the space-time continuum.
If it could learn, like, one of the reasons why dogs can't formulate, like, there's a great video on YouTube, and I actually did this. I was pitching a Dr. Dolittle thing, but making it more like an action adventure thing. Like, Dr. Dolittle was like Indiana Jones, but he used all the animals. Like, if he needed to get out of a prison, he had the rat go out, right? And then when he needed to climb over the fortress wall, he used the giraffe. And, at the end, he could fly with all these birds. They dropped the strings down so he could fly. It was action adventure thing. But in a thing, I did this video, and I found all these different instances where dogs were trying to talk, and you could hear them go, "I love you," all right, "hello," right? But the way their mouths are and their lips are, they can't make the words, but they want to make the words. And if E.T. could make the words and had the facility, he would have had conversations and would have had.
Sure.
Depart.
Of course, but then it wouldn't have been a kids movie. What you needed Yoda to come down to Earth who spoke English, and then it would be then Yoda would be, he would realize he's hanging out with these kids, and he'd be like, "So your mom's a single mom and your dad's a deadbeat douchebag, and you're all by yourself, and she's depressed," and it would have been a totally different kind of movie.
I'd like to think E.T. sensed that, but he recognized that he was safer with Anne because he had a more peaceful, gentle world, a universe view.
Yeah, of course. But what I mean to say is that I believe, though, that if there are an alien species that's observing us, I would imagine that the way we have anthropomorphized all different kinds of aliens, that they would be something a lot more difficult to understand than because we've only ever been able to conceive of aliens from our point of view. We don't know.
Yeah, but maybe you can make a discussion. I agree with that. But at the same time, if we're looking at different planets that could support life, right, we would need to look, well, what is the gravitational pull on this, right?
Yeah.
And let's say there's less gravity. Maybe they're taller, and the fact of the matter is, I think it's proved being a biped is better than being a quadruped, right?
Yeah.
Right. And unless we get the mind to learn to levitate, right? Probably it's going to be two-legged. If they learn to levitate and move things without your legs, you're probably going to see that they started out with legs, but now their legs are kind of withered because they no longer use their legs. But you see from their evolution, their legs used to be bigger, right? That there might be universals based on what can sustain life, based on the microorganisms that evolve into something, that they might end up in general being bipeds. I just get bugged in these shows where they do really great animatronics on the heads, right? And then they make the legs and the arms totally human length.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I do like the guy on Star Trek Discovery, right? The tall actor, what's the guy's name?
Doug Jones.
Doug Jones. I like the fact that they don't make his legs totally perfect. You can tell that it's like extra, one of those Olympic runners, bars on him. But I like the fact that they at least decided we're not going to make him walk like it's the human in a costume.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. Irene Jobson says, just the tip, tape, and glue. You can imagine the rest. And in case I'm busy doing fireworks, happy 4th, you all. Jay Bling says, Michael, I talk about this with Rob a lot, but how do you feel about the notion of bringing sexy back to Hollywood, meaning erotic films and erotic thrillers, which seems to have left Hollywood?
Well, it's funny. Okay, so from a male standpoint, like I always loved that shower scene of Barbara Bach in The Spy Who Loved Me. I must have gone to see The Spy Who Loved Me a couple more times just for that. But,
Jenny Agutter.
I don't know if anybody can see, but when you see, I got all these Bond posters, right? And some of them are just from Etsy. They're not the originals, right? And I was talking to my wife, and I got two daughters that are twins, and I'm like, these posters are sexist, right? They show the bikini girl sitting next to Bond. They're the old-fashioned, unenlightened male view of what they want women to be. And they make me happy because they remind me of my childhood, but I also realize that they're not PC. And I asked my wife, what do you think that my daughters walk in here and I have these un-PC things? I don't know how to do it, and I know there's this whole backlog of our backlash of people worrying about being too PC in the movies, and why are you worrying about it? They're ruining the movies because we're too woke and blah, 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 blah. Well, I still don't know why people don't say, well, would you rather be awake and woke, or would you rather be asleep? I don't understand why they think woke is such a bad word. I'd rather be awake all the time. I hate being tired and sleepy. Being sleepy, the metaphor is being stupid and unknowing and in a state of unconsciousness. But so I don't know how to answer that, because I might come off as being the woke asshole or whatever. But I think that if there was a way to bring sexy back, but it didn't objectify either the man or the woman, but that I feel like when I watch movies and I feel like there's an attraction between the couple, right? It's because I feel an attraction to, let's say, the woman on screen, right? And so when they do something sexy and you kind of see a little bit more than you're used to, it gets my hormones going, and then I'm more invested emotionally because they use my biology to draw me into the movie by using something that is a natural thing. So as long as it doesn't objectify, and we have strong women initiating it, women being strong characters, and I know I don't really necessarily like seeing the male guy's butt in the movies, but I kind of feel it's the price to pay. If I get a boob, you got to get a male butt. As long as it's kind of taking into account that we want to evolve. I think that we've started to slip back, and I think we should still just, whatever is good and doesn't hurt people and actually helps people. So yes, I would love it, but it can't be my old, Barbara Bach version.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay. Let me just ask.
Go back, Mr. The Sensual Man. By H.
Is that who wrote it? I don't remember the actual letter. No, I think it was. I didn't know which actual letters that each one. The Sensual Man was. You know what? Since you brought it up, I should find that out right now. But I think. Look, I think eroticism is important, and I think that men and women both have desires. But coupling eroticism in the context of a story is inherently sort of difficult, because it depends who the protagonist is. And I think, again, I don't think it's necessarily a double standard in society, but like, I love Catherine Trammell in Basic Instinct. She has an unrepentant sexual appetite. She also has an unrepentant attitude or appetite for murder, which makes it bad. But I think that it's hard, again, to escape biology, in the sense that ultimately the same equipment we use for procreation we use for recreation as well, and that's where there's a problem. And I think showing people lusting after one another, while it is biologically induced, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with procreation. Procreation is usually a planned thing because you're planning for the rest of someone's life. But when you lust after somebody, that's a whole different thing, even though the lust is built into us because it's supposed to lead to the conception of a child ultimately, but we figured out a way to separate the two. And once you've figured out a way to separate the two, and you have sexuality and you have desire beyond, it's like Uther Pendragon at the beginning of Excalibur. He saw the king's daughter, Igraine. He's like, I must have her. I have to have this woman. And everyone's like, well, wait a minute. We're supposed to put the country together and stop this war. And he's like, no, I have to fuck her. Like, he was willing to throw away the Merlin-engineered peace, and they were brokering peace. And because he wanted a piece of ass, Uther Pendragon was willing to throw away everything to get laid. And
let me ask you this. Sometimes I wonder if Vladimir Putin got laid all the time, why would he care so much about, bringing Ukraine back into the old Soviet Union?
Because
I think if you were experiencing more joy and getting more serotonin, I think it could reduce the level of anxiety and the desire to fight and be angry. And I think some of these guys are just not getting laid.
I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's what they think about while they're getting laid. It's like,
but maybe as a younger man, he wouldn't have deformed and evolved to this thing. He would have just been more of a hedonist and just saying, look, I'm a big guy and I got all these women and I get to do my karate thing and that's giving me pleasure. Why do I want this extra headache? All it's been is a big headache for him. And, I don't even understand. I mean, I'm going off. If he wants to bring back the Russia to be like the big Soviet Union, why do you have to have a private army to win a war against a little dinky country? You've already proven that even if you won in Ukraine, it's still not going to be like the days of old. You've proven it that your people suck. You have to hire these outsiders to do it. Your new Soviet Union is never going to be the same Soviet Union, and it never was because their technology just was never as good as everybody else. So
no, and they also, I mean, well, look, I think it goes back to, I think how men think about women too. There's a lot of men that see women as being in servitude to them, and their idea of sexuality is just sticking it inside a beautiful woman, and that's it. I think but it goes way back to the dawn of time. But the thing is, what you have to realize if you think about, if you have a partner and you're more evolved, I think sexuality is something that it's almost like artistic. It's what I imagine Vulcan sexuality to be. Like when Vulcans hook up, they have sex. They have sex for 12 hours. No, you've got a Vulcan can go down on a woman, a male Vulcan, and make her come 8 times over the course of 5 hours, and never stop.
You've done that apparently.
No. But what I mean is, it's a lot of.
When you told me your war stories.
But a lot of guys just want to look at a pretty girl and want to have them. They don't even think of them as human beings. So I think the problem is there is many different levels of human sexuality, which is problematic. But when it comes back to erotic films, one of the base things about human beings is desire, not just for sex or women or men, but also power and riches and wealth. And I think that the basis of an erotic thriller is that desire, and what is a human being desirous of, whether it's a male character or a female character or even a non-binary or transgender character. Like it's so interesting to me. All I hear about now is people talking about their identities, but no one's talking about fucking. They're talking
on your other episode.
Yeah, and it's like it's so weird to me. It's like, okay, so if you're non-binary, does that mean you sleep with whoever you want whenever you want? Like, because that would be pretty convenient. I'd be like, I wouldn't mind being non-binary.
Sexuality can go beyond the act of sex. It's how you interact, the type of people that you want to communicate with,
of course,
the levels of interest. But the thing that I was going to say that I think is very frustrated in sort of this, the gender wars is that I remember when I was growing up, when the Equal Rights Amendment came about, and my mom would have a cosmopolitan. It's always like, how do you balance home with work? How do you take charge in the bedroom? How do you deal with a toxic male boss, right? There's been so much as women. Obviously, we've got a long ways to go, but as they've made a little bit of progress, they've had all this stuff in pop culture. You can't avoid it. That they have talk shows, women's talk shows, Oprah, novels, talking to them about how do they achieve their dreams? How do they fight for their equality, income equality, all this stuff? But when all this stuff was going on, there was no equivalent in like GQ or Playboy or the Mike Douglas show where they were talking to men about how our view of objectification of women was outdated and how do we grow and evolve. We haven't had as much education, and that's why we are still very poor at the way we treat women, because the pop culture has still held on to these old-fashioned and almost fantasy versions of what we want women to be, and we haven't gotten help. And again, it comes down to my thing. It's all about education, how much education you get, and how young at a young age you get it before you get some of these bad ideas stuck in your head. And men behave badly, but we also haven't been given as much help as gender roles or our roles have changed. There's been less help for men to sort of get with the program. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
that's why we still fuck up so much.
I totally agree with that, but also, a story is a story.
Okay, I'm going to pay up.
No, but I do think, like, for instance, at the end of the day, men and women are inherently different. And when you look at something like Body Heat, Lawrence Kasdan coming off the success of writing Raiders and writing Empire, his directorial debut was Body Heat. And in it, Kathleen Turner is this woman. She even says to William Hurt at one point, "You're not very smart, are you? I like that in a man." And right. She's a scheming woman that wants to dupe this just idiot into killing her husband or whatever. Standard great noir story, really well done, great movie, great John Barry score. Kathleen Turner delivers a tour de force performance, but at the end of the day, she's still a predator. It's a twist on a male trope because it was made by.
No, but it's still the femme fatale trope. So we have that debate.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to see and look, any man can tell you horror stories about women that he's met. I mean, it's not like women are these pure as the driven snow. I mean, I've been watching a lot of what my new favorite thing to watch on YouTube is videos of confessions of people that have are suspected of. I don't know if they're. I don't know how this works, but they're releasing actual confessions of people that have committed the most heinous crimes against other people. So if you because they're part of the public record, like if the trial has already happened and they've gone to jail, so there's all these YouTube channels that show these confessions. Sometimes they're like an hour long, and these people are like the most both men and women can be equally horrible. You
did remind me in my movie 100 Girls, right? I have the main character, Jonathan Tucker, who I kind of discovered a little bit too, and has gone on to do a few good things there. He's been out there for doing a lot of great work, but he ends up kind of going in drag, but everybody thinks he's Francesca, and he hangs out with all these girls that while they're drinking. And one of the girls tells a story of how she was giving a guy a blowjob, and then something happened that was funny. And when she laughed, the guy's cum came out of her nose, like when you're drinking a Coke and you laugh and the Coke comes out of your nose, right? Well, and I wrote that in there, but I got that out of a women's magazine. They were telling all these crazy stories, and it was like women can be just as gross and make fun about sexual, and scatological as men. But it did also bring me back. I talked about John Truby, but also my friend Steve Greenfield and Chris Huntley and their partner Melanie created this thing, Dramatica, which is a very advanced screenwriting program. But one of the things that they do in there when they ask you to talk about your characters, they ask you what is the mental sex of your character. That there are certain male traits and certain female traits. But like your example of Body Heat, is that Kathleen Turner's mental sex probably was male just to organize things, right? And William Hurt's probably mental sex was female, right? And so I do think that when you start thinking about, when you say, men and women can be, some women can be as devious as a man, that's totally true. We're all equal. But it is interesting from a story sense, rather than going by gender, and this is how that gender, the man acts or the woman acts. I think from a story standpoint, they're really innovative in their software of identifying what is the mental sex of the character. And you can go through what is Sigourney Weaver's, Ripley's character. She's the male character. Not that the male characters are better or worse than female characters, but the traits associated with the male. Now she's got the mental sex. Her mental sex is male, even though she's female. And that's an interesting way of analyzing stories and also starting to think about, just in terms of the gender wars.
See, but I would also argue that in Ripley, especially in Alien, the first movie, she is female because she's also very pragmatic, and she's thinking about things like she's detail oriented. This is why I've always liked working with women as producers, because they're very detail oriented. Men, their brains are pie in the sky. They're thinking about their
that's
epic.
True, and their software is more sophisticated than that, and you're certainly pulling left and right. When I wrote my Kinsey script, I came across this really interesting anecdote about Alfred Kinsey. Not only interviewed people about sex, and he filmed them having sex. He filmed animals having sex. He studied animals having sex, and he would have like these like a rabbit having sex, and then they would introduce like a cat or a predator nearby, and the male was still pumping away and didn't notice the cat, but the female did notice the cat, right? And it also shows that maybe women are more detail oriented or more alert or are more able to be aware or able to compartmentalize, where the man is all one track. But it also goes down into the animal kingdom. I thought
no, absolutely. Listen, we have to end this because I have to go to a 4th of July family fireworks thing. Glenn Mark says he's off to do grocery shopping, but he's dreading time stamping this beast of a Robservations. Well, Michael, I have to say this is the most fun I've had on this show. Not that I don't always have fun on the show, but we've been going for 3 hours and 40 minutes.
You are the most interesting man in the world.
Oh, I don't know. You've been pretty interesting yourself today, I would say.
All right, well, I will sign off. It was super fun. I had a great time.
Well, I want to say thank you to my moderators. Bunyan Snipe is here from the UK. Tom Jr. Jackson's been here. Louise X. Sparrow was around, too. Lord Toth is here. I mean, it's been a full boat. Thank you all for moderating. I want to thank everyone who's been so generous supporting the channel via Super Chats and tips and memberships. And remember, we are having a member call on Saturday. Everybody be safe tonight on the 4th of July. But I especially want to thank my esteemed guest, Shoot 'em Up director, 100 Girls and 100 Women director, Monster Man director, 8 Days a Week director, Michael Davis, whose new animated film Nixed is going to be coming somewhere to a theater near you. He's got a new project that he's going to have many YouTubers help with, so look out for that. And if you want, go get the Blu-ray for Shoot 'em Up, because you can see my special features on it. So, Michael, thank you so much for being here. It was great to have you.
It was super fun. I'll see you again.
You will see me again. So, Michael, I will let you go, and this was great. All right, man. Thanks a lot, Michael. I appreciate you being here. Well, that was fantastic, everyone. What a lovely Independence Day Robservations. I want to thank you all for joining me. Yeah, what a show this was. And again, thanks a lot, and I will see you tomorrow. And yeah. And on that note, remember, as we talked about, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I will say to you, have a better day, have a better night, and we'll see you soon. Holy shit. That was intense, man.